Let's have a drink.
You're listening to Unscripted Moments, a podcast about propaganda. On this episode, we're discussing Failed Imagineer, track number 7 on 2017's Victory Lap from Epitaph Records. This is our 6th Victory Lap episode, which means we're halfway done, which is exciting, but also kind of sad. And I found a few press releases for Failed Imagineer, since this was the second track or second single released. One was from Exclaim, and it says, having preached an anti-fascist message their entire career, the band's progressive political stance seems more relevant than ever these days. Failed Imagineer serves as an homage to war vets dressed up on the surface as a rock and roll party.
Ooh, I like that.
And from Noisy, it says, though Victory Lap continues on the path of propaganda's sonic evolution, the band is very much the punk kids they were in the mid-90s. While Failed Imagineer might seem like your run-of-the-mill, good time rock jam, it disguises a deeper meaning underneath, as it sees them offering a drink to the hardened veterans of war. It's sort of the same twist that Less Talk More Rock pulled back in '96, where they tricked boneheaded punks into slam dancing to a deceptively fun song about a same-sex encounter. So by all means, bang your head to Failed Imagineer, but just know that there's always more than meets the eye when you're dealing with propaganda.
Indeed. And, I've been going back and forth on how I felt about the fact that, like, it almost feels like an olive branch to veterans of wars in this song, which is, really fascinating whenever you think about the career of propaganda and, thinking about like the years when propaganda was like talking about the Iraq war and the war crimes and things like that. So this one kind of, threw me for a little loop whenever I started thinking about it. But I mean, so Keith, I'm feeling very reflective today. Maybe this song had something to do with it, but, looking backwards, and just as a little discussion point, can you believe that we're actually pulling off this podcast and that people seem to kind of like it?
Sometimes I go back to our old DMs on Twitter just to see when you were like, come on, let's give it a shot. Like, let's just do it. And it's really wild to think that we had 10,000 downloads in January. Or like I said before, the fact that I, a dingus from the Midwest, have listeners.
Yeah. Well, I am equally a dingus from the Midwest. I just happen to live a little further to the east now. But yeah, we're both, Midwestern dinguses, which is, it really cracks me up. But I've just been feeling very reflective today, as we're closing in on episode 40, which almost feels sort of like a milestone, because as we said back in the beginning, there's only 88 propaganda songs on full-length records. And so, as we think about getting into the 40s, I'm like, holy smokes, we've done like almost the equivalent of half of propaganda's LP discography, even though we've been doing bonus tracks and 7-inch tracks and stuff like that too.
It doesn't feel like almost half.
I know. Well, it's not almost half, because we've done, the Sacrifice split. We did the Letter of Resignation, 7-inch. So we're kind of, we did I Am a Rifle. So we're going sort of in a meandering path. But, hitting episode 40 soon is going to feel kind of like a, almost like we're reaching the top of the mountain, and then we're going to be going down the other side. So I've just been feeling very reflective, and I think Failed Imagineer has a lot to do with that, because we're thinking about, looking back across the span of people's lives and the experiences that they have in those lives. And so this song is, really hitting me in new ways this week. It's about the secrets we keep, the stories we pass down, the ways we break down when it all becomes too much, our ghosts of the past, if you will. Right. And it's a multi-generational family story condensed into a single paragraph worth of writing. And it's quite breathtaking lyrically when you think about how this song spans multiple generations of men within a family who have such varying world experiences. And it's really pretty surreal to think about that.
Yeah, and while my family doesn't mirror the same experiences in terms of service during the Second World War, I mean, we have our own baggage that
Mm-hmm.
we're unpacking, and even if some of those people are gone. And so that's kind of what I thought a lot about, less in the context of, the greatest generation and those returning home in the 40s and then their lives in the 50s and onward. I guess mine was like just thinking about how my own family has or hasn't dealt with the challenges like within our nest.
Yeah, yeah. And I liked where you read that press release up above where it said it was an homage, because to me it's an homage to intergenerational human pain, because it gets into the darkest aspects of humanity and clearly puts a label on the way certain experiences cannot be simply moved beyond. You know what I mean? It's like there's no forgetting, and there's no moving beyond certain experiences that certain people have in this lifetime. And so I liked that term homage, because to me it's an homage to human experience as well, because a lot of our experiences we don't necessarily get to choose that they happen to us, but happen to us they do. You know what I mean? So I'm thinking as well, that I something fun that I've really liked recently as well is the Victory Lap 8-bit cover
Right.
album that showed up on YouTube recently. And I was like, thank goodness we're doing a Victory Lap song, because I've been listening to that 8-bit cover a bit more than I'd like to admit. But, Propagandy Goes Nintendo has been so fantastic to me. And so shout out to whoever made that 8-bit Victory Lap cover, and I hope you will consider doing Supporting Cast as your next 8-bit cover. But, Failed Imagineer resonates with me for many personal reasons within my own family. And I got to thinking a bit this week, and I wanted to talk to JP Peters, the producer of Victory Lap, about this particular song, because he was there as it was being tracked and he saw the creative process in the room. And to date, one of my favorite interviews we've ever done on this show is with John Paul Peters.
Oh, so good.
Yeah, for our Negredo episode. I think
Yeah.
about that interview constantly. Like in the course of all the conversations I've had on this show and the Classical Ideas podcast, my conversation with JP Peters is way up there. It is way up there. I'll never forget him like randomly busting out those click maps and stuff like that. And his conversation and his stories in the studio with Propagandy were so awesome. And I'm just so like grateful that he was willing to commit that to a recording that we could put out into the world, because now it's there and people can listen to what it's like to work with Propagandy in the studio. And that's so cool. But so I wrote JP an email earlier this week, because I felt myself wondering about his reaction to this song in particular. I don't know why, but I just was like, I wonder what JP thinks about Failed Imagineer. And it felt like a gap, if you will, from our interview, that we didn't talk about the song he engineered and tracked that went on to be Propagandy's only music video, and arguably their most well-known song via Epitaph Records' promo engine. Do you know what I mean? Their video on Failed Imagineer has like more than 1.6 million views.
Oh, wow.
On YouTube. So, this might be among the all-time most listened to Propagandy songs, because of how much it was pumped into the world, which is really cool. So I wrote JP and I said, hey, JP, I'm curious on something. I want to include a note from you in our next episode on Failed Imagineer. What stands out to you about the recording of Failed Imagineer? Just a standout memory, gut reaction, Failed Imagineer, go. So that's what I wrote to JP. It was like 3 sentences. And he's like the kindest person. JP and I have tons in common. He's super into cyclocross, punk rock, and he's just totally into dorking out. And I feel so lucky that I can shoot him a message and pick his brain. Right. And he got back to me. He's like, well, this song. So this is directly from him. The lyrics brought me to tears. It's almost a little awkward to verbalize, as I recall sitting there and feeling so impacted that I nearly lost composure. Not trying to be cheesy, just honest. It's an alignment of the stars that occurs in the bridge that they wrote here. as Todd's magical bass solo merges with the theme of acceptance and mutual understanding that lifts the soul. I still feel the same response listening to the track today.
Wow.
I know, right? What do you think about that? Any thoughts on that?
Well, my first thought is that it's not cheesy at all.
I agree.
And when I think of his interview on the Negredo episode, the words honest and earnest come to mind. So I would never have to think that anything he says about this band or probably any other, you have to take with a grain of salt, or you have to think that he's just being hyperbolic or saying something to flatter someone. I think that idea of, acceptance and mutual understanding, that has me again reworking my own ideas of this song now and building on, kind of like what you said about the olive branch.
Yeah.
Playing in greatly with that. But wow, just an incredible quote.
Yeah, and and what more could be the purpose of music than to lift the soul? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that you have to believe in an actual soul to understand what he's going for with that quote. I mean, everybody understands what's what the message is there. But thank you so much, JP at Private Ear Recording in Winnipeg, the Propagandy Whisperer, JP himself. So, Keith, we got a couple of guests on this episode. You want me to tell you about our first guest, and you can tell me about the second?
Let's do it.
All right. So, our first guest on this episode is Randy Frykas. That name may not ring a bell for a lot of listeners, but his work surely will. Randy filmed and made the Failed Imagineer music video that I bet every single listener of this podcast has seen. And it also has, like I said earlier, 1.6 million views on Epitaph's YouTube channel alone. Randy Frykas has been involved in making documentaries since 2004. After editing, tons and tons of different movies, tons of editing credits, Randy wrote and directed the documentary film Call to Arms, the story of the Royal Albert, which is a freaking awesome documentary film about Winnipeg's Albert music venue where Propagandy sort of cut their teeth. Randy has tons of other editing and directing credits, which you can see on his website. But he also plays in a band in Winnipeg called Clipwing. And interestingly, Chris Hanna was involved in Clipwing's recording process for their record called Ashford. It was recorded at Private Ear Studios, JP's studio. It was recorded with Chris at his Illegal Combatant studio, and Chris engineered and made it. So Chris actually recorded Randy's band Clipwing, and so I thought that was pretty awesome.
Yeah.
And Clipwing also played with Propagandy before. So if you've seen Propagandy up in Canada, you might have seen Clipwing play with Propagandy. But Randy, so he made the Failed Imagineer video. He made a documentary film about the Royal Albert, and he also plays hockey on the hockey team Caress of Steel, which is the hockey jersey that Chris is wearing in the Failed States liner notes. And guess who else is on Caress of Steel? The Beeve. So the Beeve, Chris, and Randy all played on the same hockey team. So I talked to Randy about the music video, the Albert documentary, playing hockey with Chris and Beeve, and a bunch more. So I am super pumped to have Randy on the show. And I talked to Chris Hanna a little bit, and he said, when I think of Randy, I mostly think of our time together as teammates on Caress of Steel, where he became our de facto captain, player, and coach. So shout out to Captain Randy Frykas, filmmaker and documentarian, who is going to be on the show. So I'm really pumped. That'll be our first interview. And so, Keith, why don't you tell us who our second one is?
Yeah, I interviewed a military historian, Kyle Bailey, whom I've been friends with for a while on Twitter. We've talked about punk and Propagandy and a little bit about history even before this podcast started. And we kind of started to chat a little bit just via DM. And it eventually got to the podcast, and Kyle didn't realize that I was the co-host. He was like, wait a second, you're that Keith. So it was kind of a funny realization. And he said, I was actually thinking about messaging you guys and seeing if you wanted a military historian to talk about some of the details in the background in Failed Imagineer. So it kind of built from there.
Perfect.
And I think it's going to be a great contrast to the different parts of the conversations today, to where he's going to provide a lot of context to what Chris's grandfathers might have experienced in the Second World War.
Fabulous. So we're going to do Randy's interview first, and we're going to talk about the music video and playing hockey, and then we're going to transition into the interview with Kyle Bailey, military historian, and then Keith and I will be back as normal to break down the song. So enjoy our conversations with Randy Frykas and Kyle Bailey, and then we'll be back in a bit. Randy Frykas, welcome to Unscripted Moments, a podcast about propaganda.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
I'm delighted to have you here, Randy. We're going to have a really good chat tonight for the episode for Failed Imagineer, and this is really wonderful. Can you just spend a moment and introduce yourself a little bit to the audience so they know who you are and what you do?
Well, like you said, my name is Randy Frykas. I'm a freelance director, editor, mainly documentary productions. But I've worked on all sorts of shows, music kind of productions, music videos, kind of everything under the sun. I've been freelance since 2005. I worked a couple of years for a broadcaster here in Winnipeg, and then figured that I didn't want to succumb to the corporate overlords of broadcast television. So I figured I should go on my own, and made that decision, like I said, about 15 years ago, and still doing it, still getting her going. So, and then just trying to play as much hockey as I can and talk hockey and, that kind of stuff.
Awesome. Fantastic. Well, Randy, I think that you're probably going to be most well known to the audience of this podcast as the director of the Failed Imagineer video, which we'll get into in a little bit. But before we do, I'm just curious how you got into film in the first place. Like, why did this career path speak to you as a person, like finding your way in the world?
It was definitely through music. So growing up, I grew up in Stonewall, Manitoba, which is just north of Winnipeg, about half an hour away. And in high school, I played in bands. I was really into like playing music, but I was also into like recording, and I had a 4-track, and I would record in my own band in the garage. Same thing, like, friends' bands and all that stuff. I was just so into that. And then, grade 12 came along, wasn't sure what I was going to do after school. Was like, should I become a teacher? Should I do something, phys ed related, whatever. I had no idea. And then my mom actually found this course in Brandon, Manitoba, which is west of Winnipeg, that offered like audio recording and video and all this kind of stuff, web production way back then. And so I kind of took that route, and then went to the 2-year course there, learned about audio recording, learned about TV, filming, shooting, editing, directing, all that stuff. Came back to Winnipeg, did my practicum at a recording studio that I won't mention, but I just folded album covers for 2 months. And it was like, well, it looks like there's no future in this. So I applied for a job at a TV broadcaster, like I mentioned, and I worked my butt off for 2 years, met a bunch of folks, and kind of, like I said, kind of forged a path. And once I cut my first documentary, it was kind of, that was the moment where I was like, okay, this is what I want to do. I love, storytelling and crafting stories like that. And a little bit kind of attributes back to, when I was in high school, there was a movie that came out called Hardcore Logo, directed by Bruce McDonald. And it was kind of like a mockumentary following a band across Western Canada. And that was kind of my first, exposure to like, oh man, like maybe there's some, like, I would love to do that. I would love to make films about music and that kind of thing. So that was a seed that was planted pretty early. And like I said, I kind of went for it, and yeah, here I am today.
Nice. What have been some of your favorite projects that you've been a part of over the years? Just some examples.
So my first film that I did on my own was a film called Call to Arms, which was a documentary about a venue here in Winnipeg called the Royal Albert. But prior to that one, I worked on the Comeback Kid DVD, which was a documentary and a live concert that was filmed in Germany. That one always sticks out to me because it felt like that was a turning point for my career. That really felt like I was starting to, find my niche in kind of independent productions and, especially music based ones. And I've done a lot of hockey. I'm a huge hockey fan. I've done a lot of hockey films and hockey productions. I worked on a couple seasons of a Sportsnet series where we followed a hockey team for the whole season, and it was kind of like the 24/7 style doc series. And then leading up to actually the Winnipeg Jets returning to here in Winnipeg, I actually started a film about a year in advance to them coming back, based on the idea of, 15 years later, people still walk around town talking about the Jets like they're still here. And then while like it was, it was true. Like people would still remember Jets moments like and talk about them like they just happened, but they were actually 20 years old or 15 years old. And through the course of making that movie or film documentary, the Jets actually came back. So that was like the perfect ending for my documentary. So I would say, the Comeback Kid one, these hockey series that I did for Sportsnet and my Jets one are definitely a few of my favorites.
Nice. How did you get into music? Like, what kind of music were you exploring, like, whenever you were younger that kind of brought you into this world?
Well, yeah, probably age 12 or 13, a few of my friends, and maybe their older brothers, they were into Nirvana and that kind of thing. And, that would have been 92, 93. So, Nirvana was like Nevermind, and, they were still quite big and before Cobain passed away there. So it was through friends, and then it's just like, like I saw one of my buddies playing guitar, and it's like, I want to do that. And then right around that time was like the punk explosion with, I was big into like Green Day and Rancid and those kind of East Bay bands.
Mm-hmm.
Those were my favorite ones. So basically once actually specifically there was a concert on We Have Much Music here in Canada, or We Have Much Music. There was a concert called Green Day Jaded in Chicago, and it was like this hour-long concert that was on TV, and I basically recorded that on VHS, and that's how I taught myself how to play guitar. I just kept watching that concert over and over again, and it's like that's how I learned chords and figured it out. So it was through through some friends, and then you find your band, and you kind of want to learn how to play those songs, and then once you can play a song or half a song, you're like, let's start a band, and that's kind of where it started.
I love it. I have such a similar story. It's crazy, almost to the letter. How did you find Propaganda? Because they're like, sort of like one of the local well-known names. You mentioned Comeback Kid earlier as well, but Propaganda and Winnipeg are so synonymous. When did you first hear Propaganda?
I was thinking about this the other day, and I think it was probably Survival of the Fattest, like the Fat Records compilation. Nation States was on that compilation, and I just remember that was the only song that I liked on that comp. I don't know why, but it was just like there was something about it. And then it's like when I found out, it's like, oh, those guys are from Portage La Prairie. And a couple of my other friends were like big Propaganda fans growing up in high school. And just for me, like I said, it was just Nation States. I was like, this song is so great. I would like skip all the other songs, and then I just remember all the other comps. Like I think maybe Cool Kids by Screeching Weasel was on the next one. Like that was a song that really stuck with me for some reason. But yeah, like for sure it was Propaganda on Survival of the Fattest was my first experience, and the one that like I still to this day I love that song. Like I just can't get enough of it.
Heck yeah. Did you become a fan of them, like them being like a band where you were? And I know they were probably gone a lot, but in the late 90s, they were like, running the record label around town a whole bunch. did you see them live? Were they like floating around? Did they enter your social orbit at all around that time?
Not really then. Like I would have to say my first live experience seeing the band, I think, was around 99 or 2000 at a venue that was called Le Rendezvous here in Winnipeg. And I remember it was like it was a benefit show. Like I said, I grew up in Stonewall, so we would have to drive into town or drive into the city for those shows. But I remember it was like the band Randy from Sweden was also playing. And I was like seeing those guys, they were just bananas, and I loved
Unbelievable.
it. Yeah. And then seeing Propaganda, I guess I think it was like Today's Empires, Tomorrow's Ashes.
Okay.
Around that time is like when I would have really started to get into them. Like, my friends were into them. I was just more into like I said, the East Bay stuff. And then around that album and seeing them live is when I would have for sure started to become a fan. And I didn't really cross paths with them until much later.
Yeah. So, that was about 20 years ago now that you sort of dove in with, Today's Empires era. Do you have a favorite record that stands out from the band as something that's like your favorite record by them that's your go-to?
I wouldn't say I have a favorite. Like, I love Supporting Cast. Well, I guess quick little, like, Today's Empires, Tomorrow's Ashes. The other cool thing about that one is like I remember, like I was freelancing at a production house in Winnipeg, and I think they recorded parts of that album at that same place.
Oh, sweet.
So when I was like reading the album liner, I was like, "This is crazy!" Like they recorded some of this. Like it's like the 1 degree of separation. Like because Winnipeg's a small town kind of feel. Like everyone's within 1 degree of each other kind of thing. So that was one thing that I remembered was kind of interesting about that. And then just through the years, it's just been really cool just to see how the music has progressed, and like thinking about like from the mid 90s to where they're at today. Like I don't have a favorite. Like I don't I like the full album experience and like what it represents from that period of time, or the topics that they're singing about, or that kind of thing. So it's on any given day I'm maybe spinning a different one. Like I said, Supporting Cast kind of I think that would have come out around the time when I was doing the Albert documentary. So I just would have been spinning that one a lot, just trying to get into the zone for filmmaking or writing or whatever. Failed States would have been around I think I was actually in the studio with them for a day or two filming during Failed States.
Oh, sweet.
If I remember correctly. And then Victory Lap, just because it's the most recent one. And I remember like the first time I heard that record, I made a event out of it. Like I sat here at my computer, I had headphones on, I made sure I had a beer, and I just like fully immersed myself into it. And I just remember it being just such a rewarding experience. But yeah, like it's all different, like sometimes I'll throw on the old stuff or whatever, but yeah, no favorites for real. I like it all. Like variety is great.
Nice. Well, and what's really funny is you just mentioned Failed States, and you also mentioned earlier that you love hockey, and I know that you have a connection to Propaganda with an adult hockey league. And if anybody in Failed States knows the picture in the LP of Chris, I think I've got it right here actually. Yeah, I've got the LP. Here it is. He's wearing a hockey jersey on the inside of the album, and I believe that is your hockey team's jersey. Am I correct?
That's correct. Yeah, I think he's probably wearing the white jersey.
Yeah,
with the owl on the front.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about the hockey team, Caress of Steel, because I'm super curious about what you guys are up to.
So Caress of Steel was I guess you could say it's a beer league hockey team that was put together around the same year that actually the Jets came back, so 2011. Chris and Beeve would have been part of like the original group of players. Eric Paz was the main kind of guy spearheading it, and he still is to this day. So it, like I said, it was just a group of friends, like a lot of music, based connections, and also artists and that kind of thing. Some teachers too as well. And it was just, I think they just all had the urge to start a team, and I didn't really know them back then. I knew Chris vaguely through talking to him for the Albert documentary, but one of my friends said, Chris made a post somewhere, they're looking for hockey players, and like I played hockey my whole life, and it's like, oh dude, can I come play? And then I joined their team, and kind of like as a a spare or whatever, a part-timer. And then I played every single season with Crest of Steel since 2011. So it's just a group of guys that we love hockey, and it's a good time together.
I was looking at your Instagram for the hockey team earlier, and there's something that you guys have in all the pictures. I believe it's called the Dirty Owl.
That's correct. Yeah.
Can you tell me a little bit about the Dirty Owl? Because I thought that was awesome. And the owl is on the jersey, which is also really cool.
Yeah. So Caress of Steel, it's a Rush reference. So, there's the Rush album that kind of has the same owl look to it. And then to the, we have, so the jersey that Chris is wearing in the album there was the very first set of jerseys. And we don't really wear those ones anymore. We have a couple new sets. We have like a black jersey that's kind of like the vintage look with the strings, and it's got a big C kind of like on the front, and then the owls on the shoulders. And then we did like kind of like a ripoff of the Canada Cup jersey that says it just says Caress, and it's got like instead of a maple leaf, like the partial maple leaf on Team Canada Cup, it's like a wing. And so obviously everything is surrounded around the owl. So someone had one of those, decorative
yard
owls.
Things.
Yeah. You keep in your yard to keep the whatever away, the, bunnies or whatever. So that just turned into the player of the game, award, the Dirty Owl Award. And we it's Dirty for short. We just call it Dirty. Who's got dirty. And it's not necessarily the guy or, the player that scores the most goals or has the big play. It's the player on Crest of Steel that, exemplifies, what our team is all about. And basically it's like, working hard and doing what's good for the team kind of thing. So yeah, the Dirty Owl Award. Yeah.
It's so cool. Well, and there's tons of propaganda related stuff in Caress of Steel. So Beav and Chris are or have been on the team at different points in time. I think I also saw Wab Canoe, who did the Things I Like narration during the outro of Things I Like on Failed States. So there's tons of propaganda stuff within this team. And I also noticed that you and Chris, like I found some stats. Saw that you and Chris are like freaking goal scorers, man. Like you have like 185 goals or something in this beer league hockey team. So like you're out there shredding.
Yeah, no, yeah, there's we've definitely, like quite a few years ago, Chris and I would go to Stick and Puck quite a bit together. And that's where you pay $7 and you can just go shoot the puck around at one of the local rinks here. But so to this day, Chris and Beav are considered alumni Crest of Steel players.
Okay.
Wob is still on the team. And obviously, things are shut down right now. So all we can really do is talk about hockey. But yeah, one of my favorite memories, that always sticks with me is I remember, like, I think this was probably the first season. I remember Chris on a breakaway, going up the ice, and I was following behind him, and, I was beaver tapping, like, pass me the puck, even though he's on a breakaway. He scored, but I was a little choked. I could at least got an assist or something, but yeah, no, it was always a great time with those guys. And, some games would get heated and, we would win, we would lose or whatever. But then after the game, it's just kind of like, the camaraderie and, all those moments that, we all definitely miss right now because we can't do it. But, those are priceless memories.
Well, hopefully chatting about it with me a little bit is going to be a nice little, make it feel good a little bit for at least tonight. So Randy, the reason that you and I got in touch is because a friend of yours reached out to me saying you really need to have Randy on the podcast because he's the director of Propagandy's only music video, Failed Imagineer, from Victory Lap. And I'm really excited to hear about the process of this video. And the video is credited on YouTube as Caress of Steel Productions, the same name as the hockey team. So I found that to be an absolute delight. But Propagandy is not a band that's known for music videos. So I'm curious if you can tell the story of how the opportunity came along to make this video with the band.
Yeah, just through the connection of, being around each other a lot, playing hockey, over the years, there's been some brief discussions about making some sort of Propagandy film or a documentary. Just have never got to that point of going for it just yet. But just from being around, I think maybe the band and Epitaph were probably looking for something to put out there, like to promote the record when it was coming out. So yeah, it was just kind of like, do you want to film a video for us? What would you want to do? Kind of thing. Like it wasn't like a full out, there was no treatments or proposals or anything like that. It just, probably around that time we were playing hockey together and it's like, yeah, we want to shoot a video. Do you want to do it, kind of thing? So, not a lot of planning went into it. But I just remember thinking like, yeah, this is a band that has been around for quite a while and they don't have a music video, like, filmed and edited. Like they have a lot of live stuff and different fan things put out there. But so this one, I guess, being the first official one, if you want to call it that. But yeah, there was not a lot of went into it. It was probably a post hockey thing saying, "Hey, we need to shoot a video. Do you want to do it?"
Nice. So this isn't like the kind of video where you had to like make like a bunch of storyboards or anything like that, right? It was kind of just like a lot more simpler than that, right?
Well, I'll just tell you here. So basically, they were rehearsing for a tour because Sue Lynn would have just come to town.
Yeah.
And so they were rehearsing. They're like, do you want to come shoot the video before our rehearsal this day, whichever day it was? Like it was in the summer. I remember that. Probably, I think June or July. And I was like, sure. So I met them at their jam space. I set up one light. They played the song twice and they were like, okay, that's good. And I'm like, well, if I need to make a video here, I can't just do it on 2 takes. So then they played other songs and I filmed them playing other songs. So like a lot of the shots in the music video are them actually playing other songs that I could just use to cut for some variety. Cause without that, I was like 2 takes, like this is going to be difficult. So yeah, it was I was maybe there for an hour and
what?
Yeah. And yeah, that's what it was. And then I put together a first cut and then I don't know if it's still, I don't watch a lot of music videos, but like lyric videos, I think are a lot bigger or they have been bigger. So then adding that aspect to it, like, cause originally there was no lyrics on it. It was just the video. And then I think maybe by request of Chris or the record label, they were saying, can you add some text to it? So then that's where the idea came up where, get the handwritten lyrics and I'll put those up like and sync them with the lyrics in the song. And that's kind of where it was. So I remember that summer, it was really hot, man. Like their jam space wasn't really the most ventilated spot, but they made it work. And then I had to go on the road for a TV series for like 6 weeks. So I remember finishing the edit in hotel rooms across Canada. So yeah, not a huge extravagant story, but I just remember them finishing the song for the second time saying, okay, that's it. Like, see you later.
Oh my God.
And I was like, oh, at least let me shoot like a couple other songs.
So something I was curious about is like whenever they're playing the song, I mean, were the amps in the room like full volume, super loud? Was the room really loud when you were filming?
They were actually playing the song, so they must. Well, they definitely do play to a click. So the click would be set to the same tempo as the recorded song. So they were actually playing in the video. They all have in ears and stuff like that. So I couldn't remember hearing the vocals, but yeah, like amps were on, drums were being hit. It was is real. I'm just glad that they performed it at the same speed as the album version, or else I would have been screwed.
Well, that's what I was going to say. Like, was there any planning that went into making sure that it would actually align to the recorded version? But I'm assuming that they probably played the click that they used when they recorded it with JP over at Private Ear. So, I'm glad that that worked out, because that was actually one of the questions I was wondering is like, how do you sync a live performance to the studio recorded version of a song? Because that's not easy.
Well, yeah, if it wasn't the right tempo, then you got to start adjusting the speed and maybe editing a bit faster. And yeah, so anyways, I was thankful that it was a pretty good sync.
Nice. So, folks got a big kick out of the fact that Todd is wearing a tattoo shirt on some of the clips. And then in the next clip, he will be not wearing the tattoo shirt. So I'm assuming on one of the takes, he was wearing the shirt, and on the other take, he was not wearing the shirt. And then you just went back and forth as far as the editing process between those two versions.
Yeah, there was definitely not a continuity person on set. So
I mean,
as I was the only one there. So yeah, no, it was just kind of one of those things. I don't like it's, you just go for it. You just, whatever it's going to be what it's going to be. And that's what it was.
I loved that little version. And then another little thing that I really liked about the video was the ending that says everything is connected to everything else, which is like the poster hanging on the wall at the end of the video. And I'm curious if you had a comment on ending the video on that poster.
Yeah, honestly, I had no idea. Like, I just saw that in their space, and it's like, it's totally true. Like, I believe that. So it's like, that's cool. I'm putting that in. And then like you also see the Sea Shepherd flag up on the wall there. It just, not only did I want to capture the performance and like, make this music video, but also give people a glimpse at like, what a propaganda rehearsal would look like, or just like what does their space look like, or whatever, like where they would practice or the stuff like that. So just, I know that there was like a lot of people that were, pretty stoked on seeing, what it looks like behind the scenes, because they only get to see them on stage for the most part.
Yeah. Do you have any other stories of like, working with the band behind the scenes, like something that would, that stands out to you as like partnering with them or being friends with them or anything like that?
A couple things, I guess. Like, it must have been Failed States when I spent a couple days in the studio with them. And like, there's a video for it online somewhere. I could find it. I'll send you the link later.
Please do.
It was like a promo video for that record. And I just remember getting to see their process in the studio with JP, and like Beav and Chris were in one studio doing guitars, and JP and Todd, by this time the drums were done already. And just like, it was pretty cool just to see the specifics, like, and like the attention to detail that those guys take towards the performance and towards like the crafting of the song and everything. It's just like, it's, yeah, if I spent, well, I guess, with editing I do, but like, it's pretty cool to see people just like really, pay so much attention to making sure it's exactly what they want it to be. So I just remember, like just seeing how good they are at playing, how consistent they were, and just steady. And then that, that just kind of reminded me of like, I'm in a band called Clipwing, and we recorded one of our EPs at the same studio, and we got Chris to produce it for us.
Oh, sweet.
So I remember like doing my guitar overdubs with Chris like one afternoon or whatever it was, and aside from like probably, 3 dozen hockey cliches that were probably getting thrown around like as I was doing it. Like it was cool to be pushed by someone like that. Like you could play guitar by yourself in your room or wherever if you're playing live, but to then kind of be there with him and then kind of feel like you gotta each take you gotta like bring your A game and same thing with hockey. It's like we were always like really competitive just to make sure that we made ourselves a good team. And just so yeah, just those were kind of moments that we got to share together and were pretty cool.
Randy, where can people find Clipwing's music if they want to check out your stuff?
Yeah, if you just probably like any music service like
Bandcamp.
It's Bandcamp. Also, it's on Apple Music. It's on Spotify.
Sweet.
So it was our record called Ashford, or EP called Ashford that Chris produced.
Amazing. That's so cool. Well, okay. So before we go, there's another project that of yours that I want to ask you about. Last night, I watched your movie, Call to Arms, the story of the Royal Albert, a documentary about the legendary CBGBs of Canada, essentially, at 48 Albert Street in Winnipeg. Tell me a little bit about this film. Tell me a little bit about the significance of the Albert in your life.
So yeah, the Albert was pretty much the place where like anyone could play. It was your grungy, kind of dirty, but full of character kind of venue. If you had a band with your buddies, you could play there. It was the place that, if you were into punk or metal or, anything similar, you would definitely go to the Albert. If there was nothing to do, just, you wouldn't even know who's playing. You'll just still go there and you'll see somebody that, or you'll end up like hearing a band that you become a big fan of or whatever. So it's like long before I made this film or worked on this film, like, there was a whole history of that, the Albert in Winnipeg from like way back, in like 1913 or whenever it was built. But it just kind of found its way to become like this venue, like a rock venue, punk venue, I guess. If you could go down the list, there's like bands like Green Day and I'm drawing a blank right now, but Sloan has played there, and yeah, anyways, I'm doing a bad job of the list right now, but there's so many bands. Obviously Propaganda would have played there with No Effects, like you name it, and if they were on a tour across Canada, they would have played the Albert. So just basically right in line. And my band, like way back then, prior to Clipwing, would have played the Albert quite a few times too. So I had that connection of being on stage there and stuff, performing in front of 3 people kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, then the opportunity came up right after I worked on a DVD production for Comeback Kid. Up until that point, I was mainly an editor, and then I got the opportunity to become, the full director, writer. I shot the whole thing all myself, like the whole thing. I, directed, edited, written, shot all by me. So it was my first production that I did all on my own. And I probably spent 13 months on that thing.
Nice.
A lot of, beer and sweat and stressful nights and, what should I do here and what should I do there? And it was a long process because it was my very first film. It'll always be a special one, obviously. But yeah, just it's I don't know. I
love seeing Damian Abraham from Fucked Up was in the movie.
Yeah.
So folks from Sloan were in the movie. Tom from No Means No was in the movie. Chris and Todd from Propaganda. What was the process like for like landing these interviews and getting people involved that you wanted to comment on the history of the Albert?
Yeah, so like prior to production, it just kind of like all the research that I did, like, reading books whenever there was a mention of the Albert, like Dave Bedini wrote a book called On a Cold Road, where there's a section about the Albert in there. And then just through like different articles and through word of mouth, like who's played here, who's coming here, and then, or just sending out like just hundreds of emails like, I'm doing a film about the Albert. Do you have anything to say about it? Like, have you ever played there? Have you ever been there? So it was just kind of like, you just cast such a wide net, and you see who you catch. Actually, Green Day played in Winnipeg at the MTS Center, or whatever they call it now. I think it was the 21st Century Breakdown tour, and they had the day off prior to their show in Winnipeg, so they got here early. And Mike Dirnt and Trey Cool showed up at the Albert, and like everyone, like there was like the buzz.
Come
It's
on.
like everyone was like, oh, like these guys are gonna, like, it sounds like Green Day is gonna be there. Green Day's roadies have a band and they want to kind of have a party night or whatever. So yeah, like Mike Dirnt and Trey Cool showed up, and then I just remember like I had my camera with me and I was talking to Mike Dirnt saying like, I'm making a film about the Albert. Is there any way I can get an interview with you for my film? And while I was talking to him, like by the pool tables, and people that have been there know where those are in the room, the whole time Mike Dirnt's bodyguard was like right in my ear telling me to get the F out of here. I'm gonna kick, I'm gonna,
Oh my God.
the whole time Mike Dirnt was still talking to me. And then but so anyways, yeah, the bodyguard wasn't having any of it, and I was like, well, if I'm going to get my butt kicked, I might as well do it while I'm trying to get like the biggest interview of my life, kind of thing. It never panned out. I went to the Green Day show the next day, and I was like, if there's any way, like, obviously all their media requests, and I'm just some little kid, like in a backpack, like it's this indie filmmaker kind of guy. So I'm just trying to do what I can. And it never panned out, but it was just one of those cool things that I never would have been put in that situation if I wasn't making the film. So, just so many memories that, were part of that thing. And yeah, just, it's pretty wild.
Did you ever get to see Propaganda at the Albert, or was that a little before your time?
Well, they would have played the Albert like, while I was a fan, but I probably didn't go. I know, like, I've seen them at the Pyramid Cabaret. I've seen them at the Windsor. My band actually opened for Propaganda one New Year's Eve, which was a wild evening. I've seen them at, I've seen them quite a few places. I don't think I've seen them at the Albert.
So is there there's been a lot of like changing of hands, I think, of the Albert in the last couple of years. Do you know anything about what's going on with the venue right now? If it's like still active, or if it's like restarting after the pandemic or anything?
Last I heard, I think there is something going on. Like there's a new owner involved, and there was some sort of activity going on there. As far as specifics go, I couldn't really speak to that. I know there's been, like, since it closed, it's reopened a couple times, and it's kind of restructured, and there was new gear in there, like new sound gear and different people booking and stuff. So I'm not quite sure where that's at, but the building's still there.
Awesome. Nice. Well, Randy, I have absolutely loved this conversation. We've talked about hockey and filmmaking and music videos. I just love it. Where can people find you if they, want to know more about your work, or if there's a way for people to watch Call to Arms, or anything that you want to throw out into the universe for the listeners of Unscripted Moments, a podcast about propaganda?
Probably the easiest way to find me is on Twitter, and it's just at Randy Frykas, RANDYFRYKAS. I'm there. I'm not on Instagram personally, but I'm running my new project is called the Outdoor Hockey Club, and it's a film about outdoor hockey that I'm starting to produce. And I haven't been able to film too much right now, but what I've been doing is I've just been passing out hockey pucks that I've been making to anyone and everyone that wants a puck and just loves outdoor hockey. So you can find that on Instagram at Outdoor Hockey Club. So probably those are the two best ways to find me. You can also find a lot of my stuff on Vimeo, vimeo.com/Randy Frykas, or YouTube /Randy Frykas. So that's where most of my stuff is.
Awesome, Randy. Well, I know that the listeners enjoyed this conversation as much as I enjoyed having it, and I really hope you had a good time. Thank you so much for coming on Unscripted Moments. I've had just an absolute blast hanging out.
Totally, man. This is awesome. I love nerding out, and you're doing a good thing. Keep up the good work. I've heard a lot of good things. A lot of my friends are into your show, and I've just, after doing a quick deep dive through some of your episodes over the past week, it's really cool to see what you're doing, and the fact that you're taking something that you really love to talk about, and you're really making a go of it. Like, kudos to you. Folks out there, if if you have a passion, you gotta go after it.
What have we here? The trade failed Imagineer. This private display on public display. Son, do not be alive by
Kyle Bailey, welcome to Unscripted Moments, a podcast about propaganda.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Kyle, you and I have been friends on Twitter for a long time. And what's cool about this project is I've actually been able to talk to a number of different people that I knew via Twitter first. And for me, what comes to mind is seeing you shared like your battle vest and you turned a Kylisa patch into just your name. Like it was your name tag, right?
Yeah. I remember that actually, because I think you posted something and were like, should I make a battle vest?
Is 35 too old?
I was like, never. And then I was showing off the one that I made recently, and I was like, oh, and sew with dental floss, and smash your pins with a book so that they stay on, right? I was giving you like all the tips that 15-year-olds learn and stuff. But yeah, the Kyle patch thing is kind of funny because my friend Mac Attack from Reno, he worked in this record store there, and like the Kylesa patch was on the wall, and like I have to admit, I'm not even a Kylesa fan.
Sure.
But he just like every time we went in there would be like, you have to turn this patch into a Kyle patch and wear it as a name tag on your vest. And I like resisted for a very long time and was finally like, okay, fuck it. And he just gave it to me to do it. So I've been transferring it between vests for probably about 12 years now.
I've always been really jealous of the people who can insert their name into a band name on social media. And Keith, it just doesn't work. Like if there's Colt, you could be Colt Thrower or something, but I don't know. I guess pulling Keith instead of pulling teeth, but I don't think that one is very clear.
I like pulling Keith. That's I like that.
So we've been friends on Twitter for a while, but this is the first time that we've actually talked, which is really awesome. So Kyle, tell us a bit about yourself, your work, and your research.
I currently live in Durham, North Carolina. I'm a graduate student at North Carolina State University currently. My focus is in military history. Right now, I'm mostly focused on militarization as it has to do with the Memorial Land Grant Act. I won't get too into that because it's more of like a tentative research question for me at this point. But that's really where most of my focus is. I'm kind of working on a thesis geared towards that. So my undergraduate degree is in Peace, War, and Defense, which I got at UNC Chapel Hill. So my focus military history-wise is generally pretty global. I like to think about sort of bigger questions. I spent a couple years really focused on ancient history. And so now I'm sort of transferring into more early modern American military history. Mm-hmm. So I know that's kind of a jumble, but yeah, my interests are all over the place. I think it's clear that World War II isn't necessarily my area of expertise, but I've been reading military history my entire life. Like it's been basically my biggest passion. I only decided to do it professionally when I was in my late 20s. Mm-hmm. I've been reading about World War II for decades. So it's something I'm hugely interested in, even though I didn't go that way academically.
So let's talk a little bit about music as well. Can you share how you first heard propaganda? Like what's your journey been like as a fan?
Yeah. It was kind of fun to think about this, honestly, knowing I was going to come on here. So I remember that, when I was really young, like 14, 15, and decided that I wanted to be a punk. I would grab any of those, do you remember those Punk-O-Rama and Fat Records, samplers and stuff?
My brother got a pair of Vans and he didn't want the CD because he hated punk. He just thought the fashion was cool. So I got a Punk-O-Rama CD, and that's pretty much my origin story with a ton of music.
Oh yeah, me too. Same thing. I would just, because they were $3 to $5 at the record store, so I would just grab any one of those I could find. So I discovered so many great bands with those, 15, even the Victory Records ones from that old hardcore label.
Oh yeah.
So many, or I discovered Earth Crisis on there, and just so much of that. But So one of these had "Stick That Flag Up Your Goddamn Ass" on it. And that was the first Propaganda song I heard for sure. And so I was like just hooked by that song, just the whole like, wait a minute, dad, like I just like, I was immediately like, this is fucking great. But it didn't like make me a big fan right away or anything like that. Cause at the time I was just sort of like take all comers. Like I was just trying to like pick up any punk music I could find, really.
Yeah.
And then probably like a year later, I remember I went to Tower Records and I got 3 CDs at the same time. I got Breed the Killers by Earth Crisis. I got The Gang's All Here by Dropkick Murphys. And I got Today's Empire's Tomorrow's Ashes because it had just come out. So this was like 2001. And so that was really the first Propaganda album I got real heavy into was Today's Empire, which is interesting because I was like more acquainted with their sort of newer sound initially. Getting into their newer music, I know a lot of fans that was sort of a hump to get over for a lot of people, but I never experienced that, which I think was great. So like when they released subsequent albums, I was like just all over it. But so after I got that record, I was briefly living with my friends Cam and Tress in Reno, and Tress was a big Propaganda fan, and so she had the Let's Talk More Rock LP. She would play it all the time when I was living with them, and so I just got super hooked on that record. And when I moved in with these other guys, like they would get like honestly annoyed and shit because I would get up in the morning and listen to it every day for like months on end. And pretty much from that point on, I've been like, I pre-order all their records. I've got like 12 Propaganda T-shirts. If I'm coming to your function, there's a probably 4 in 5 chance I'm going to be wearing a Propaganda shirt. So yeah, pretty much since then, since I was about 18 or 19 or so, when I really got hooked on Let's Talk, they've been my favorite band. Like that's been a really easy question for me to answer as to who my favorite band is. And my friend Josh Hardy has always kind of been my like, my compatriot in Propaganda fandom. Like he's the one guy I sort of cling on to. And I've seen him a few times. I saw him when I was pretty young on the Today's Empire's tour in Reno, which was great. And I saw him again in Portland. I think that was around 2009. That was with Rebel Spell and Millions of Dead Cops. And then I saw them the last time, I think it was probably 2012 or 13 in Greensboro, North Carolina. So yeah, only 3 times, unfortunately, but every time was fucking, incredibly memorable. It was, a religious experience for an atheist like me.
Well, our stories are pretty similar because I also started with Today's Empires, then kind of worked backwards, and I didn't have that change to digest. My change was retroactive. So
sure, same, yeah.
Greg and I get a lot of pushback since, we weren't there from the beginning with how to clean everything, and Greg more so with Less Talk. So while my appreciation is growing and expanding, I mean, just my initial connection with the band is definitely Today's Empires. So I'm really excited to talk about some history today for the song Failed Imagineer, and especially because I have adjusted or I've evolved in my thinking of military history, probably in high school. I think that's all I thought history was because every class was almost solely through the context of major conflict in the in the United States, and then expanding out from there from political and cultural and diplomatic history. I'm not really a military history person. It's not what I read on my own. So I think this is really fascinating for me to expand my scope and to hear how you hear this song. So let's start a bit with that then. What do you think is important for listeners to know when they hear the lyrics? As Chris is ostensibly speaking to his sons, he says, back when the war ended, your great grandfather hand wrote letters of apology to all of those families of men who crewed that U-boat, haunted till his death by that long night off the coast. So what do you think is most important for listeners to know hearing that?
I mean, I think the song at least begs me to think about the experience of the people involved in this scenario that he's laying out here. And not just his grandfather, but, the men aboard that U-boat who are, we can assume, killed in this incident. I think this lyric leaves us with some questions that I've always wondered about ever since hearing it. Like the handwritten letters. I wish I knew if he somehow figured out who any of them were and if these letters were delivered or if these were just, written for himself, that sort of thing. Sort of letter that's written never intending to be sent. I wish I knew the answer to that. Maybe we can know the answer to that.
Yeah.
I just want to sort of talk about the things that I think are interesting about incidents in U-boat warfare, essentially, that would lead to somebody to be in this situation. And kind of starting with like the U-boat crews themselves, I think to understand how it might affect someone to blow up a U-boat, you have to think about what that really entails and what the people aboard the U-boat had to go through. So the first thing to think about is, a U-boat is, there's probably around 45 people on board it in World War II. Fairly large amount of people to go down at one time. Okay, but I think like a really important thing to know about U-boat crews and being on a U-boat is that this is easily the most dangerous job in modern military history, to board a German U-boat in World War II. I mean, the numbers are staggering. We're talking about a death rate of somewhere around 57%.
Wow. So
if at any time you stepped onto a U-boat in World War II as a crewman, the most likely scenario was death. A total of 67% were casualty, or 68% rather, were casualties. So, another 11% or so of these people would either be captured or missing or mortally wounded, a variety of other categories that took them out of the war. But the very most likely scenario is that you die. And this is different than other kinds of combat, because generally in most combat throughout history, there's a lot of anecdotes that, aren't like this, but generally speaking, the most likely scenario if you go to war is you live. The second most likely scenario is you're wounded. The least likely one is you die. The number of wounded is generally much higher than dead. Whereas in this form of warfare, the number of dead greatly outnumbers the number of wounded. So the stakes are just higher here. And if you think about it, there's a lot of reasons why. I mean, obviously they're in a U-boat, they're underwater. If it takes a direct hit, the entire crew is likely to be killed. There's not a lot of chances of people coming out of this wounded. And the people who were captured or survived, it was often because the boat was scuttled, like they essentially gave it up, or were able to surface, or maybe they were hit on the surface and some guys were able to get out. But the point I'm trying to get at is this is just like a terrifying, almost suicidal situation that these U-boat crewmen are in. And like I said, the numbers are staggering. And altogether in the war, nearly 30,000 are killed. So it's 28,000 plus are killed. The numbers change depending on where you're looking, but it's somewhere in that ballpark. But I do want to contextualize that just a little bit. There's one thing that I read kind of comparing that to, just to put this in context of how bad things were in World War II altogether. So the average monthly deaths in the Eastern Front in the German army alone were about 45,000 a month. So the U-boats lost, about that amount in the entire war.
Yeah.
And the German army was losing that a month in 1942 in one front.
Wow.
So, the sheer loss of life going on at this time is staggering by itself. But if we look at just the U-boat crewmen, I think, it's just, I was talking to my fiance about this the other night, and I was like, it's the most dangerous job. And she said, it's not dangerous, it's suicidal. And I was like, statistically, yes, it does kind of come off that way. So I guess maybe I should talk a little bit about the Battle of the Atlantic, which is sort of the larger part of the war that's going on here. So after the Germans captured France in 1940, England is fairly isolated at that point, and they're really reliant for supplies on stuff coming from North America. It's pretty much the only lifeline that they really have left at that point. So the Germans take that opportunity as a way to, they send the U-boats out towards Canada to try to block any of those supplies coming from Canada to the United Kingdom. So they're out there just prowling along the Canadian coast and the sea lanes between the United Kingdom and Canada, just trying to sink anything that's crossing. At first, this is working really well. That's the thing that's really scary about it, is the Canadians and the British weren't super prepared to deal with this. So the German U-boats would get in among these convoys and just start sinking ships left and right early on. So yeah, England was super isolated after the fall of France. And the way that the Canadians were trying to get supplies to England was through a convoy system. So the way the convoy system worked was they would group all these ships full of supplies together and try to send them across all at once. And the theory behind that is, the ocean is so big that the most likely scenario is that two ships, even looking for each other, are just going to pass one another and never see each other. So U-boats out there even searching for ships are likely not to find you. So the hope here is that if you clump a bunch of ships together, that the likely scenario of them sneaking through will happen to a bunch of them all at the same time. So they would just clump them together. And that way also you could have an escort. You could have a number of ships or airplanes that would be following along with this convoy to defend it in the case that any U-boats did find it. So in the scenario that you were sending one ship out at a time, you couldn't possibly send a warship to defend every single one. So this is a way to defend every ship and possibly sneak through a bunch at the same time. Yeah. And it was largely pretty successful. But the downside here was that if a submarine did find the convoy, there's a bunch of ships there for them to start shooting at. And early on, when the Canadians and the British didn't have a lot of good defensive mechanisms, they didn't have a ship that was really purpose-built for attacking submarines, the submarines could get in and destroy half the convoy.
Oh, wow, man.
And the warships would sit there damn near helplessly, couldn't really do anything. I can't even imagine the feeling of that. This is the sort of scenario that I imagine Chris's grandfather found himself in, either escorting a convoy out into the water. It's possible that he was just defending the coastline because the Germans would come in, try to drop mines, try to attack, coastal fortifications, things like that. They did a lot of different things. It's a little hard to come up with an exact scenario that he must have been in, but I think we can assume that the song is describing him sinking a U-boat. And so I try to think about what that experience would be like and why that's sort of a unique way to experience combat. So, for example, have you ever read Howard Zinn's book, The Bomb?
No.
I don't know if you knew that Howard Zinn was a bombardier in World War II. So he was on board a bomber. He was the guy who kind of aimed and dropped the bombs. And he talks a little bit in that about what it was like to do that, like when he did it. And he just describes it as an impersonal thing. He didn't. He didn't think about how when he was dropping a bomb on a city that there were people or what they were experiencing. He just literally says it was impersonal. And he says it wasn't until he was out of uniform. This is a quote. He says, "It wasn't until I was out of uniform that I did have an awakening, a shock of understanding. He came to think of his own bombing missions and how he had mindlessly dropped bombs on cities without thinking of the human beings on the ground or what they were experiencing." I think there's something similar here if you're in a ship firing on a U-boat.
Absolutely.
It's a crew service weapon. You don't see the people that you're firing at. You probably don't see the destruction that you wrought, really. And so it's easy to imagine that in a scenario like this, it's at the time it would feel like a triumph. You do want to blow up this U-boat. That's what you're out there to do. But you can imagine later in your life reflecting on what you had done, especially if you became aware that, there were maybe about 45 people on board, or maybe you learned who some of these individuals were, or, maybe you learned how dangerous of a job they had, or, I think you know what I'm saying. It's just like, it's if you haven't been there, it's impossible to put yourself in that position. Like, of course it would haunt someone until the day they died. And I'm not asking anyone to be sympathetic to Nazis, of course, but I think when you think about the people who are actually in the boat that's being destroyed, it's hard not to sympathize with the situation that they found themselves in. I mean, equally hard not to sympathize with the person who was tasked with killing them.
Well, Kyle, based off of what you've already described, I guess I'm getting almost a realization in the contrast then with the other great grandfather. So it says, your other great granddad came back from Arnhem, transformed into a damaged and violent man, never spoke of the slaughter he witnessed firsthand. Ah, this is the world I brought you into, man. And so can you share some information about that? And I think what my realization is that I haven't really considered now is just the contrast of experiences, but the shared experience being the trauma following the service.
Absolutely. And I think, yeah, Keith, man, that's the thing that stands out the most to me about this song is that it really describes a variety of experience in the same war, which, that's the first thing that really stood out to me when I heard it. Like you said, there's a continuity in this experience as well. And I think maybe we'll talk about this a little later, but like there's also a continuity to today that I feel like the song is sort of pointing to a little bit.
Absolutely, yeah.
But yeah, so Arnhem is a different situation. Just a little bit of context there. So again, I don't know exactly where in this battle or campaign he was. I'm assuming he was actually in Arnhem. I'm going to kind of go with that. But the Battle of Arnhem is part of a larger campaign called Market Garden. think a lot of people are familiar with this. This is a pretty famous campaign. The movie A Bridge Too Far is about it. I'm sure most people have heard that phrase at the very least. So this was mid-September 1944. After the Allies had captured Normandy and kind of broken out from the Normandy beachhead, they were moving towards Germany and, a pretty broad front, just kind of applying pressure all along the line. And they had 3 big army groups that were just kind of moving in tandem. And this started to create a lot of problems. I mean, logistically, it was really hard to supply all of these armies moving at the same time. This was really a slow, very meticulous way of taking over. A lot of people were feeling impatient about it. And so a British general, Bernard Montgomery, who was another pretty famous figure, I think a lot of people would be familiar with, he came up with this idea for Market Garden. Essentially, the plan is to drop off 3 groups of airborne troopers in a corridor that stretches into the Netherlands. Those paratroopers are going to secure 5 bridges along this corridor. And so while they hold these bridges down, the 30th Corps, which is just a ground unit, a bunch of guys on foot and tanks, are going to basically punch through this corridor, get to the end to reinforce all the paratroopers along the way. And then they're basically in Germany at that point. They're ready to go. This is a bad plan. I mean, I don't like to do a lot of like armchair generaling.
Sure.
But this is a really bad plan. There's really a lot of moving parts. It depends on a lot of super close coordination. It quickly falls apart. And so Arnhem is the final bridge. Arnhem is the bridge too far. It's at the end of this corridor that they're supposed to get to at the end of this campaign and then break out into Germany from there. But in the end, the reinforcements never make it there. The airborne troops they drop barely capture the bridge. Most of them are killed or captured by the end. I mean, it turns into a complete fiasco. I mean, for example, the first group of British guys who dropped near Arnhem, they didn't even drop them on, in the city. They dropped them outside of it, and they were expected to fight their way in.
Oh, God.
Because the Air Force expected to take too many casualties and lose too many planes if they were to just fly right over. They expected a lot of anti-aircraft fire. Other problem is that intelligence that showed that 2 German panzer divisions were in the area was essentially ignored. So these airborne troopers who dropped near Arnhem were expecting light resistance. And what they found instead was, basically elite corps of the German army waiting for them. And a lot of them were they were resting and refitting from the fighting they'd been doing in Normandy, these German panzer divisions, but very much like a broken escalator is still stairs, a broken tank is still a big ass gun.
Yeah.
So what ended up happening in Arnhem was it was a fiasco. Only a handful of these airborne troopers managed to get to the Arnhem Bridge. They do hold it down. God, I think the battle goes on for, it's like 9 days or something like that. And so they do end up holding it down for a while under constant German attack. Again, it's a disaster. It ends up being about 2,000 Allied killed in the Battle of Arnhem, and then about another 7,000 end up being captured. And the German casualties are about 1,300 killed. So it's often called the last German victory. Again, I just want to stress how bad of a plan this really was. And it really illustrates, I think, the limits of kind of airborne warfare. There's kind of 3 major airborne operations you can point to in World War II. There's the sort of famous airborne drop around D-Day. And that one was, I think, relatively successful as far as interdicting German supplies and reinforcements from coming to the beachhead. That went pretty well. But the other really big one was a big German airdrop on Crete. They used airborne troops to take Crete. And that was successful, but if I remember right, the casualty rate there was like 50%. I mean, it was staggering how many people they lost. And that should have been a lesson about the limits here, and it wasn't, I don't think. So yeah, that's just the kind of the historical context of Arnhem. Really a fascinating battle. Bridge Too Far is a fun movie to watch if anybody wants to know, I guess the basics of it. I wouldn't call it good history or anything, but
Right.
it's out there. So again, I don't know what Chris's grandfather's role would be in this battle, but this sort of city fighting behind enemy lines, surrounded, just hoping that reinforcements are going to come. This number of casualties, you can only, again, imagine what this would do to a person. And I think it's interesting too, another way in which this story juxtaposes with the one of the other grandfather, the kind of different reactions that it portrays. Like this one becomes a violent and damaged man, right? Whereas the other one it's more of a regretful, almost, it seems, heartfelt reaction, right?
Yeah.
But they're reacting to the same thing, kind of, right? This sort of like the psychological effect of combat is not like an expertise of mine, but you have to wonder.
And what really stands out, Kyle, from those details is, I mean, despite knowing clearly that the song is about war and struggling with those personal experiences, hearing now and really thinking specifically about how terrifying those two experiences are, yet it might be kind of the bounciest song on the album, to where it's upbeat. It sounds a lot like one of their older songs that might have a little bit of snark or humor in it because it's so upbeat and almost lighthearted sounding. And that contrasting with these details, I mean, my mind is sort of just like, I can't wrap my mind around that right now.
Yeah, no, I have a hard time with that, actually. I don't really understand that. Like, I don't have a theory about that.
Yeah.
I think that the part that especially throws me off is the intro thing.
Right.
The all right, people, which I think it's I don't think it's a particularly funny joke. I mean, it's whatever. Yeah, I don't. It seems a little incongruent, and I'm not quite sure what the decision was there. You don't have a theory on this?
No, I do not. No.
Oddly enough, though, there is a song it kind of reminds me of, which is a System of a Down song, no less, that has a similar vibe in that sense, which is that I don't remember the name of the song, but it's the everybody's going to the party. But again, a very upbeat song about like partying and Burning Man or whatever. But at the same time, they're talking about like presidents fighting the wars and like, I don't know.
Yeah.
It's just like very incongruent and hard to understand why.
Well, I want to jump back a little bit to history, Kyle. So
Sure.
Before he passed away, military historian Dr. Dennis Showalter gave a speech that I saw. I think it was right after he passed. It's available on YouTube if any listeners are interested. It's titled "Why Americans Should Study Military History," and he explains the importance of asking and answering questions like, why do wars begin and end? How do we avoid them and mitigate their effects? And he said these questions must be addressed in the context of change. So I'm curious, individuals who are not historians but are engaging with history, and if they think about history, if you had to pick a single word, then right, so rather than thinking of military history just in the context of change, like, how do you think about this song? Is it the word change or is it something else?
Okay, that's a good question, because I have to admit that like the thing that stands out to me the most in this song is a continuity more than anything.
Yeah.
Like I think about the continuity of outcomes that both of his grandfathers apparently had, that they basically lived in a culture and in a situation that produced a similar, pretty gnarly outcome for both of them. And a lot of what I think the song is getting across is like, but this is still the world we're living in. Like in so many disappointing ways, the world that produced those outcomes for my grandfathers is the one that I'm bestowing upon you. That's the thing that strikes me the most about this song. Less about change, more about how things stay the same in very disappointing ways. And I don't know, the way I sort of read this song a little bit is like, I don't think Chris is at all saying like, I'm scarred in a similar way as my war-scarred grandparents or whatever, But I do think there's some message there of like, we're all living in this culture that is scarring us all, right? And for some of us, it's really bad. For your grandparents, it was really bad. But it's been bad for me. And it's going to be bad for you. Of course, that's we need to have a drink over this conversation type conversation, Like, I don't know if I'm misinterpreting this song, but like that's always how it struck me. But as far as this Dennis Showalter quote, I really like it. Like, I think that he's pointing to another thing that I think is important in like a continuity sense, because he's asking like, we should study why wars began and why wars end. So that to me says he's looking for sort of broader questions to ask about warfare generally. Like, let's talk about how wars begin and how wars end. And I think those are the questions that are important about military history. Like, to add to that a little bit, I'm going to borrow a little bit from one of my favorite historians, Wayne Lee. And the way he talks about why military history remains really important is because, you know, cultures and societies have dealt with unleashing violence and restraining it in a lot of different ways over time, because warfare is both violence and restraint. You know, both of these things are happening. You know, it's a push and pull between those two things. And that's the main thing I'm borrowing from Wayne Lee there. Like, he has a really good way of talking about that. And that push and pull between violence and restraint, and the way that we culturally conceive of warfare and the way it actually happens on the ground, all that stuff is still happening. I mean, anybody, you know, our age who lived through, you know, or continues to live through the war on terror, you know, we've seen that happen. We saw our society unleash, you know, unrestrained violence. We've seen it. And we've watched as our culture talked about it in one way, while we get other images like, you know, we talk about it as a glorious thing. You know, we knee-jerkly support and worship our troops. And then we get images like Abu Ghraib, and we get, you know, war crimes, and we don't know how to reconcile these things.
Yeah.
None of that is new. You know, all of that is stuff that we can think about through military history. And that's all happening off of the battlefield too, is another important point I want to make, is that I shouldn't say it's all happening off the battlefield. That's misleading. My point is that, like, military history in that sense is so much more than the study of battles.
Yeah.
And Keith, you said something really interesting at the beginning of this about how you used to think that all history was military history. And I think a lot of people have felt like that, especially when they were younger. And I think that military history suffers from that. I think the reason is because, I mean, to bring a propaganda lyric into it, it's the pornography of force. There is a lot of focus on that in the way that history is taught. We kind of bracket things around wars. If you go to any bookstore, you know, the history books are likely to be categorized something like world history, U.S. history, Civil War, World War II, Vietnam War, right? So it's got a lot of commercial success. A lot of that stuff is fucking garbage. And so military history very much becomes associated with that stuff, which is the sort of drums and trumpets, you know, let's go over and over Napoleon's battles, or over and over the specs of weapons and things like that. And that stuff is fun, and I love to read that as a kid, but it's not useful to anyone. I don't think. Maybe if you're a military practitioner, it can be useful. Or if you want to write one of these kind of weird 20 leadership lessons of, you know, Alexander the Great type books or whatever. But, like, I think there's really valuable military history being written that ask the questions more like what Dennis Showalter is suggesting, and I was trying to suggest, but it very much gets drowned out by the focus on combat, the focus on battles, the focus on glory and things like that I think detract from understanding more than contribute to it in a lot of ways.
I mean, I think specifically to an elective I had in high school called History of War, and it was essentially memorizing generals in each battle or the number of casualties, but never personalized stories, never experiences of a human being. You look at this massive number, and there's no way for me, you know, as a 16-year-old, as a 17-year-old, to really understand what any of that means. So I think this also brings me to an understanding in how to address that, whether, you know, if it's teaching the War of 1812 or the American Revolution or the Civil War, is getting away from the factoid, the very easily searchable trivia part, and understanding the human experiences, but also I think helping students, which I talked to Dr. Heather Mayer about, in helping students process that information that they're exposed to, because it's heavy.
Yeah, it's heavy. And yeah, I think throwing a lot of big numbers around too, it just doesn't, it's not helpful. Keith, I'm curious, just do you find that your students are, like, more excited about or react better to, stories of combat and casualties rates? I mean, do they want to hear that stuff?
There are a number of students I've had, either present or past, who already have maybe personal experience at home, if their family is into military history, if they watch stuff on TV, and they have like the trivia stuff really well down, and probably in a lot of cases better than I do. But I don't do much of that. If I do much, like if we do address those things, it might be some independent work on their own, but it's never the focus. And it's never like, that's going to be on your quiz. And, you don't have a flashcard with a battle and, how many people died at the second battle of Bull Run, because I don't really find value in that. I see more using as many primary sources as possible, and looking at how specific events and the interpretations of them change over time. So a lot of my, as again, not a trained historian, as someone whose idea of what history is and how to teach it has shifted so much in the years that I've been teaching. All of this is kind of new to me, to where I'm like, wait a second, that's not what I want to do. And I want to bring a little bit more of an accurate depiction of what history is, since my own vision of it is very cloudy. And I just think a lot of what my teachers did was kind of easy, and it was notes, and it was never analysis, and it was never document investigation. It was never narrative. It was simply just, here's what happened, and then you memorize it, and then you give it back to the teacher on the test. And I don't, even with eighth graders, I don't do that. I don't do anything like that.
I'm glad to hear it. And that was, I'm sure a lot of us who sympathize with that experience in school, of that being our history education. And I think it's so misguided. I personally don't, I'm not a professor or anything. I work as a TA nowadays, but I don't want or expect any of my students to know dates even. I don't.
Oh, right. Yeah.
I don't find it that useful. I mean, I do like to use things called coat hook dates, where you just learn 4 or 5 that are pretty far apart, and they kind of situate everything in between them.
Mm-hmm.
I find that to be just a really good tool. The main thing that matters to me is sequence. Anyway, that's a little off, getting a little off topic here. But my point is that I'm just totally agreeing with you that I think the focus in education tends to be wrong. It tends to be on facts and not on analysis. And I don't want to overstate this, but history is our interpretation of the past.
Yeah.
The past are the things that happened. There's a difference there.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have to ask, are we teaching people to think about history, which is to say to interpret the past based on evidence, or are we just asking them to regurgitate dates and figures? Because that's not history.
Well, I want to think about a little bit with interpretation then. So jumping back to these 2 anecdotes about family members serving in World War II, obviously they contrast sharply, I think, with the post-war narratives and the popular depictions of the greatest generation. So I'm curious how maybe the history of World War II is changing. I know your focus is military history, but how that might conflict with popular memory, or how the history now depicts that. I mean, so stories like those of Chris's grandfathers were not a part of my high school classes. And from what I can tell, those tragic war and post-war stories seem to be wholesale absent from media, movies, TV. Do you see that changing?
A little bit. Let me say, specifically with World War II, definitely after the war, there was a real interpretation that the United States especially, but the Allies in particular, really led to the downfall of Nazi Germany. I think people nowadays just popularly are much more willing to acknowledge that the Russians played a larger part in that.
Yeah.
Just as a simple historical question, I think people are far enough away from it now where, in the Cold War, I guess, is far enough away that we can acknowledge the reality of that. As far as the popular interpretation of warfare generally, and World War II in particular, and these sort of stories of war-based trauma that aren't glorifying at all. I wish that I could say I felt like that was changing a lot, but I don't. I think that depictions of warfare in popular culture have become rawer, and I think there's some benefit to that. I think there are some things that don't make it seem quite so glorified as it once was. And I'll take it back to another propaganda song, I suppose, because we're on a propaganda podcast.
Of course.
But it's like the Dear Coach's Corner thing. Like, you can't, if I went to a Panthers game many years ago with a friend of mine, and it was like Military Appreciation Day, which I didn't know going into it, and definitely made me think of Dear Coach's Corner a lot. I mean, like, fucking fighter jets buzzing the stadium, and everybody's clapping and cheering, and there's soldiers marching on the field being given medals and shit.
Yeah.
And I was like, it's that sort of thing. Like, I've experienced too much of that to feel like we're at a place where we are, as a society or as a culture, like really weighing the consequences of warfare on ourselves as a society, let alone on the individuals who we're sending to fight those wars. I do think there's more willingness to talk about that stuff. I don't want to totally poo-poo it. And there's a lot more resources for these guys out there now, and I'm grateful for all of that. And I'm glad that we're recognizing it up to a certain point. But I don't think we've learned not to start stupid wars for stupid fucking reasons. And I don't think that any amount of stories about how badly it's gone for people, or any changes in the way that we try to interpret warfare, have appreciably led to less enthusiasm for war.
Yeah.
I'll admit that I sound really cynical, and I am cynical around this issue. Yeah.
Again, you're on a propaganda podcast. So.
Yeah. I don't know. I really wish I could say that in popular culture that the attitudes were changing.
Sure.
But I don't. Only in some places.
Yeah. I just ask because for me, teaching the American Revolution up to Reconstruction, I definitely have felt I've been teaching middle school for 14 years. And in that time, in reading more outside of what was just assigned, obviously in my classes, seeing the narrative regarding the Civil War and the Reconstruction era seep into more mainstream discourse. So because I don't teach the Second World War, I don't spend as much time with that. I don't spend any time with it, like personally, because I mostly just focus on what I teach to build upon that. But I still had this sense that it feels stagnant in a way.
Yeah, it does. It does feel like that. I mean, yeah, I just agree. Yeah. And the Civil War is one. I've read hundreds of books about the Civil War. It's probably the thing. I was as growing up, I was a big Civil War buff. That was like my thing, that kind of propelled me into what I'm doing now. And that's easily the most frustrating topic to know a lot about in the United States these days, because everyone's a fucking expert, and everyone's dad has read, a book about Robert E. Lee or whatever.
Shelby Foote.
Yeah, everybody read Shelby Foote, of course. But yeah, I mean, I don't know, this is hard for me not to go on a tangent about.
No,
but,
that's okay.
If you want to see how broken Americans' attitudes are towards military history, but just sort of history generally, like, look no further than the debates around the Civil War. It's real bad.
Well, Kyle, I feel like this conversation has enriched my understanding of the song so much. Like, I really thought, like, man, I know what it's about. And now hearing these details and asking different questions in reading the lyrics, I feel like I have so much to process that I'm going to keep thinking about, not just with the song, but as you said, our struggle as a nation, our culture of war, and our seemingly inability to learn from, right? Like I tell my students repeatedly, obviously the past doesn't repeat. It informs the present, hopefully, like in some maybe naively positive way, to say that we can use it to inform the present, to improve. It doesn't seem like that. Like you said, we continue to get into stupid wars, but ultimately I feel like my understanding of this has just has grown and has become far more vivid in realizing what Chris is really describing with those experiences. So I'm super appreciative of your knowledge, of your interpretation, and your time to chat about this.
Like I said, this is my first time appearing as a guest on a podcast. So I feel like I just rambled this entire time, and I'm just curious to see what I actually said. But no, it was really fun to chat, and these broader questions are things that I think about a lot. And it was fun to kind of muse about them a little bit with you, and it was good. It was fun to have an excuse to take some time to think about some issues I don't normally think about.
Every dog has his day. Sit down with me, let's have a chat.
All right, so those were our fabulous conversations. Thanks again to Randy Frykas and Kyle Bailey for joining us on the show. We had such a wide range of topics between those two interviews. And it's just so cool to have Randy on and talk about making music videos, and being friends with Beav and Chris playing hockey. And then your conversation with Kyle just goes so much into detail. I mean, what stands out to you about Kyle's interview to you?
Well, I said just the realization at how different the experiences would have been at sea and like in urban combat in the Western Front in Europe, and how those different experiences might have, at least in part, who knows, it's hard to say, had a role in shaping how those individuals then dealt with or coped with or had trouble dealing with and coping with their experiences during the war, because the lines themselves are not very long.
Right.
But to really think about obviously the overlap of terror and death and fear, but how different the experiences were. I guess that part I hadn't really considered, and Kyle did just an excellent job explaining how important both were, but just drastically far apart.
Yeah, I feel so lucky, the caliber of folks who want to come on here and talk about the Easter eggs within Propaganda lyrics, because they're worlds within these lyrics. I mean, you put one word in a song, and it becomes an entire afternoon of following that thread, preparing for this show. And sometimes I get really mad. I'm like, oh, well, now I have to follow that thread too, because if you don't, you miss out on something really beautiful. And then the show lacks something that it could otherwise have. But I love it when those beautiful moments come in, because then I get to learn things. And to me, I learned so much doing this show. It really is surreal. So, Keith, do you want to, should we start off with the music on this episode, and then we'll dive into the lyrics after that?
Yeah, Greg, I think that's a good idea. And I'll say first that with the music, again, this was the second track released before Victory Lap officially came out. And I got to be honest, I was actually really surprised by the change in sound, or at least that the song sounded so punk with some metallic thrashy parts that you find on Empires and Onward. But the crux of the song is really fast, melodic punk rock.
Yeah.
And the song's intro, I think, could actually be a little bit misleading, especially hearing it alongside only Victory Lap. I kind of mistook it for another anthemic rocker, which in a way it is, but it's also just far more like less talk than it is, say, Failed States.
Right. Well, and if you think about that that riff, it's almost like Back to the Motor League. It has a lot of reminiscence of Back to the Motor League. And the reason why it doesn't sound like Back to the Motor League is because the guitar tone is so different on the recording, I think. But to me, it has that same kind of chugging, really upbeat, energetic style of guitar riff that opens up Back to the Motor League as well.
It's like really fast rock and roll. Yeah, that opening riff, and then you got the Tom G. Warrior grunt again. Yeah, it really in that opening sounds really similar to Victory Lap, the song Victory Lap. But once the verse starts, it sounds like something to me that the band hadn't done in quite a long time.
Yeah, but the thing is, then when you dive into the content, almost like this is a song that really I feel like could only be written by a middle-aged person who is thinking back on aging and life experience, which you can't really effectively do when you're in your 20s because you don't have those years of life experience, those years of failure essentially behind you, to where you can truly and deeply empathize with the people who are years down the road from you. You know what I mean? But to me as well, we have a very strong melodic song that feels appropriate for parts of, like, kind of reminds me of the sound of like Name and Address, Die Jugend marschiert, some stuff on Less Talk, maybe Back to the Motor League. And the song musically kind of reminds me of some elements of Motor League, like I said, but a little less frantic. But it starts off with the party. But it's only 2 minutes and 8 seconds and this song gets in and out and wastes no time whatsoever. And what's really funny is it's such a short song, but it has that 14-second long intro where Todd's going, "All right, people," so it's got this super long intro in a song that barely takes up any time whatsoever. But yeah, it launches through the song super quick. But I was digging into some album reviews from when the album came out, and I found some fantastic ones. A magazine in Australia called Heavy wrote, "Failed Imagineer is the favorite of mine. It has doses of melody, but absolutely slams. Lyrically heavy also, but endearing as well. The ratcheting guitar line is my earworm for the next month." And then in Vice, Dan Ozzie wrote Failed Imagineer, a song that kicks off with an over-the-top Gene Simmons-esque cry of, "All right, people, we're going to have a rock and roll party tonight," before cracking into a chugging riff that would make Maiden smile. But of course, no matter how much their sound morphs and evolves over the years, Propaganda is still a punk band at its core. Though Victory Lap continues on the path of Propaganda's sonic evolution, the band is very much the punk kids they were in the 90s. And I think that you may have quoted that earlier, didn't you? So we found that same review, which is cool. And so I really liked that. But I found another interview with Chris in a publication called Stereo Board that ties Zoocosis and Failed Imagineer together with a lyric, "This is the world I brought you into, man." And, later on that same article from Stereo Board, it describes the unique feeling and tone of Victory Lap compared to Failed States. And it says people generally have a lot to say when Propaganda puts out a new record. There will still be a few who can't get over the fact that they don't play How to Clean Everything style skate punk anymore. And there will be others who miss the grinding heaviness of Failed States. But right now, this stripped back, fist in the air collection of songs feels vital. Songs aren't acts of protest in a vacuum, but they can get people together in a room. Maybe that's a start. So this was a very different approach for this record compared to the darkness of Failed States. So I think that it was a big, big shock to the system for me. When this came out, I was not expecting something so bright in a lot of ways.
No, I agree, especially after Victory Lap, which hits a little differently. There was a lot about this song that was like, wait, I'm not processing this.
Yeah. Well, let's get into the guitar. There's more to Meets the Eye on guitar than meets this. There's more to Meets the Eye on this song on guitar. And it was confusing to me a little bit. The song has always sort of flabbergasted me with the riffs because I don't know a ton about music and time signatures. So I kept listening to it. And I noticed that Chris was doing what sounds like a different time signature of play compared to Jord. So Jord appears to just be ripping a pretty good and fairly straightforward beat, but the guitar is not nearly as straightforward. It feels like it should be far simpler than it is, but it just isn't. So I was trying to wrap my brain around this, and I emailed Tim McMiller from Protest the Hero, who is a guitar mastermind in his own right. And I was like, Tim, what is up with Failed Imagineer? What is it that is so rad on the guitar in a way that I can't verbalize? So he put it on and he counted it out, and he did a little video for me where he counts off the song right when the vocals come in, where the and there are 2 bars of 5/4 and 2 bars of 4/4. So Chris is throwing in that extra hit to make it a back and forth 5/4 to 4/4 time signature shift. Really, and it really makes this thing a mind bender wrapped in a nice little catchy package, because the song is so catchy and sounds so straightforward, but it's got this extra little element where he switches into a different time signature with an extra beat and a 4/4 time. So he hits that 5/4 2 times, then goes back to 4/4, and then goes back to the 5/4. So I just thought that was so neat. And Tim sent me a little video where he's counting it on his fingers on his and he's like, this is a really scientific way of counting out the song. And so when it goes boom, ooh, and then he was like thumb, pointer, middle, ring, pinky, and he was counting it out for me, and it was really cracking me up. So thanks to Tim for hooking me up, because I thought that was really awesome. What did you find out about the guitar?
I've mentioned the YouTuber before, Clem_last note.
He's awesome.
Yeah. He has a series where he plays literally every single song on this album. And this is kind of what I leaned on heavily to try to wrap my head around the guitar. And yeah, that opening thrashy riff feels like something that you might hear on, like you said, on Motor League, and then it jumps even further back in time with that really melodic punk riff. And what's really cool about that is how it ends with picking out a chord, which we hear a lot on Empires and on Potemkin, but I really like that this isn't so fast. It really allows those notes to breathe and ring, and then it jumps back into that thrashy riff. And I think it's really cool how it ends up mirroring the vocals, where Chris sings all remorse, no rebel.
Yeah.
Shell of my former shell. And even the riff, the way, just the timing of it and when he plays matches up with the phrasing of his lyrics there. And I have to say too, that when it gets to What Have We Here, this might be one of my favorite bridges in a Propaganda song. I mean, I really love the vocals. Again, the picked chords add a ton of texture and depth. And there's just so much, for lack of better term, raw emotion in that part. And then when it gets to Hey Old Man, I mean, the song just absolutely transforms from what sounds like, a party, rock and roll banger, sound, and it ends up sounding more like an interlude you might hear on Potemkin.
Yeah. And, the power of that bridge, it really needs to be emphasized, because that's what JP said also. JP is like, that bridge, and then the bass solo comes in, is so spectacular. And I'm appreciating this. This happens to me every time we do a song off Victory Lap, where I come to appreciate Victory Lap more. And Victory Lap came out, when I was like 34, 35 years old, and new music just, it tends to hit you in such different ways. It reduces in the ways that it hits you sometimes. So when Victory Lap came out, I think I slept on it for a long time, and I think I just kept listening to supporting casts. You know what I mean? And so every time we do one of these songs on Victory Lap hit me in new ways. So I'm like just stoked. But I also found an interview that Chris did about the guitars used on this record. And Chris said it was pretty much just SGs plugged into JCM 800s and a borrowed Friedman BE 100 with not much in between. And then Chris said he used a Marshall cab with greenbacks, and Beav and Sue Lin used a Mesa cab with V30s. So there we have a little gear rundown as well.
Cool.
And he talked about that in an interview when it came out. But man, we got to talk a little bit about Todd.
I mean, most of the comments on YouTube are about Todd's bass lines.
Yeah. What did you find? Because tell me about your thoughts on bass on this one.
Well, I think it goes without saying that Todd doesn't just follow the drums or the guitar, but he builds off that main riff in the verse, which makes it sound like the guitars are switching chords more than they really are. And then, as JP mentioned in his email to you, his runs under Hey Old Man, that interlude, or which evolves from that bridge, I really think that part is the musical star of the song. I mean, that is what I think of when the song comes to mind. It's kind of jazzy, it's delicate, and for being a bass, I mean, it just lifts the song.
It's one of the best moments on the entire record.
I agree.
Yeah. And the bass line under the chugging fast riffs are really cool too. Todd doesn't just follow the main riff on the bass whenever Chris is really going on that main riff. It's more of like a marchy kind of. He's like doo 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 doo. He's got this really nice low high approach to when he's playing bass under the singing in the first half of the song before that bass solo stuff starts. So if anybody out there is curious, like, you should go watch some bass playthrough videos that awesome bassists have done of this song, because it's so cool what he does. What a great tune on the bass. I really love the bass line throughout. You should go watch those playthroughs. I love how the bass and the guitar follow each other on the music under All Remorse, No Rebel. So you said how that part really matched the singing. So the bass really hits that part too. But this song is absolutely gorgeous because of the de facto solo under Hey Old Man, It's Okay. Like I said, I think it's probably might be the best moment on the entire album. And I found a video of Propaganda playing this song live in 2016, a long way before this record came out, and Todd was nailing that bass solo over a year before the album came out. So this was something that took shape early in the writing process and really stuck. I think that they must have known that was such an important moment, because they're such tinkerers with so many of their records. And I think this one they wrote a little faster. I think Chris said that he was just really busy in life, and that the first riff that would come out, like the first lines that would come out, he wasn't like over editing himself over and over. But this is one of those moments that really stuck with that bass solo. Any thoughts on the drumming?
No, I want to hear what you have to say as the resident drummer here.
Not a ton. This song is significantly harder on the drums than it sounds, at least to me, because it has all these starts and stops that come in really interesting spots based on Chris's riff of popping back and forth in the time signatures. But so that's why Jord's pauses feel interesting. It's not like a Newfound Glory pop punk style pause in the song. You know what I mean? It's an interesting way that Jord stops and starts, because Chris is messing with the time signatures. So it gives Jord some liberty to be able to pause in bizarre places. But I really love how Jord rides the crash a ton under the main riff of the song, because he's hitting this. I think it was like a Zildjian custom in the video that Randy made, and it's such a bright cymbal that Jord's riding on, but he's not bashing it. He's just really, really delicately riding on it, almost like Bill Stevenson does. If you watch Bill Stevenson play drums, how gentle Bill is on his cymbals. That's how Jord's riding that crash. But, we also have that double bass emulation on the floor tom throughout the song as well, like we talked about in the Nailing Descartes to the Wall episode. So that's another one of those signature Jord moments from throughout Propaganda's discography, which is really great.
How about anything from the vocals and the vocal delivery?
All right. So I had some weird fun this week, man. I decided to try something new for this episode because I was so inspired by that 8-bit cover of the record. And I was like, there's a lot of words that Chris is cramming in here. It says a lot in a very short period of time, and the vocal delivery looks like a workout. So, well, how do you test that? How do you test to see what it feels like coming out of your mouth singing? So I wanted to try to sing this song. So I went on an internet ripping YouTube Ripper website where you download YouTube videos as MP3s. So I downloaded that entire 8-bit cover as an MP3, and I chopped Failed Imagineer I chopped Failed Imagineer out of the audio, and I tried to sing over the 8-bit cover of Failed Imagineer. And I did it like 10 times in a row because I was reading the lyrics on the screen, listening to the studio version of the song over and over, and I was mouthing it. And I was like, this is a workout on my jaw, just mouthing the words. So I was like, all right, this seems hard. I should see what it feels like. So I dropped the Failed Imagineer music of the 8-bit into GarageBand, hooked up the mic here, stood up, had a swig of beer, and I tried singing this thing. And I tried it like 7, 8, 9, 10 times. And I think my 5th try was the best, but I just could not even nail that entire section that says, back when the war ended, your great-grandfather handwrote letters of apology to all of those families of the men who crewed that U-boat, haunted till his death by that long night off the coast. That's a lot of words strung together. And there are some big words in there too. Like words that were making me work very hard. And then, your other great granddad came back from Arnhem, transformed into a damaged and violent man. There's a lot going on there in those words. It is hard stuff to sing. So I'm not a vocalist at all, but if you want to bust out some singing yourselves, anybody out there can rip that 8-bit cover off YouTube with an MP3 downloader, throw it into your GarageBand or Audacity, snip the sections with a good old Command T, and let her rip. I was tripping on it. I was like, is this really this hard? And then I tried to do Call Before You Dig, and I nailed that one almost on the first try, timing-wise. But it sounded like garbage because my throat was tired because I just sang Failed Imagineer 10 times in a row because I have a desk job and I hardly ever talk, so I'm very weak. But anyway, just for fun, here is a snippet of me farting around, probably having some of the only pure joy I've had recently. And this is from Thursday, February 4th, 2021, of me singing Failed Imagineer. Keith, what'd you think about my goofy fun there?
I'm glad you did it and it wasn't me.
Yeah, it is not cool singing in your house when your family is in the other room. It is not. And I'm not a great singer at all. But I just had to know what this song felt like to sing because the lyrics are so just crammed in there, and you really got to be acrobatic with your jaw to get these words out in time.
Yeah, and I have to say, Greg, that honestly, I didn't really love this song when I first heard it, and it's still probably not my favorite or even in the top, favorite of the album, on the album. And it's actually partly because of the vocals. And even though I appreciate the phrasing and the just ability to be able to string those things together and sing it while playing guitar, there's just something about it that makes it hard for me to even process the lyrics. I'm just not crazy in how they're delivered, and my ears just don't process them. So when I first heard it, I was like, wow, this is really different. Obviously musically it sounds older, it sounds a little bit more punk rock, but the vocals I just still don't love, even if I could admit to say that that's incredibly hard to do. Because even as you were reading it, watching your mouth move from thin to wide to, open to close, seeing the amount of movement involved to appropriately make each of those sounds has got to be incredibly demanding. I don't know. There's something about the vocals that just doesn't really mesh well with my ears.
Yeah, but you know what's so funny is like when Chris sings them versus when I sing them, like he gets the words out and I just was like blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
So that it's really interesting to think about the physicality of it as well, because you know this is something that you're performing live on stage every night, and it's really easy to flub those lines. I flubbed like 8 versions of that in a row. And the one that I did still was crap. And I was like, wow, man, he like, ugh. Oh yeah. So what else you got? Anything else on the vocals in the song?
Well, I think the backing vocals really stand out here too. And especially with Your Other Great Granddad. So when that begins, the backing vocals make this sound just so much bigger than, you know, the first verse. And that switch is one of my favorite parts musically in the entire song.
Nice. And in the video, that's Sue Lin singing. So I'm wondering if Sue Lin is on the record singing those backup vocals as well, because obviously I wasn't there. I'm not 100% sure.
According to Epitaph's site, it says, it says Todd, Jord, and Sue Lin. It has them listed for backing vocals for all of them, but who specifically was on this track, I'm not sure.
Perfect. Okay, well, should we dive into the lyrics a little bit?
Let's do it.
So our old pal, David Anthony, wrote an article in Vice about Propaganda in 2017, and he wrote, while Victory Lap doesn't have many songs about the joys of riffing, it instead catches the band in a transitional moment. And I see Failed Imagineer. This is me now, not David. I see Failed Imagineer as a song about Chris's transition in his personal life and realizing that time is short. And he has some answers he needs to get before the people able to give those answers are gone. You know, Chris's songs about family really hit me, and they started hitting me when Without Love came out. You know, whenever I heard that song Without Love in 2009, I was like, whoa, this is new for Propaganda for me. And I love the idea that this song is in the canon of Chris's songs about his family. You know, if you look carefully, you can see the story of Chris's relationship with his family in songs across the Propaganda discography. You know, there's Stick the Flag, Preteen McCarthyist, Without Love, Devil's Creek, Unscripted Moment, Adventures in Zoocosis, and Failed Imagineer. So I see those songs as a plot, one of the many plots of Propaganda. You have war crimes songs, you have animal songs, you have gender and sexuality songs, and you know, you have family is one of those plots. And you get a really intimate look inside Chris's look across those 7 songs that I listed. And I'm sure there are more as well that I'm overlooking, but I'm sure, you know, it feels like a very specific collection of tunes across the band's work, you know? So that's kind of where I see this song in the position of songs across their many records. You know what I mean?
Yeah, Greg. And it's kind of surprising to think back, if you remember on Chris's Without Love episode on Patreon, that he expressed that he was hesitant in writing a song that forward and that personal, and he wasn't sure perhaps how, you know, the other band members or the fans would respond to something like that. But here we are to see, you know, now we have almost several songs like that on each record.
Yeah. So I have the opening line here. I've been thinking about you, you know, and I have a really hard time disconnecting this entire year that we have just lived from almost any song that I hear. I mean, you can put on any song right now and I will find some way to connect it to the past, you know, 12 months of 2020 into 2021. And this has been like the most boring, most overwhelming, most isolating, most frustrating year. And I know it's going to take me a long time to be fully functional in the world again, if that ever completely happens. But this year has made me realize the personal relationships that I have crushed, ruined, taken for granted, or just outright ignored at various points in my life. And I have found myself thinking about so many people. So whenever I hear, I've been thinking about you, I'm like, holy smokes. Now I start listing in my head all the people who fit one of those categories that I mentioned. You know what I mean?
Yeah, the lyrics here almost seem so ordinary that you could just jump right past them and rush ahead to addressing the dueling experiences of the grandfathers at war. But I'm right with you, Greg. I tell you, this last year, despite social distancing and despite my dad moving to Atlanta, so just thinking about my own father, I've actually been closer with him, I think, this year than ever. And I've always been really close with my dad. But I just think due to the types of conversations we've been forced to have with the pandemic, family members struggling, my wife and I expecting our first child at the end of 2020. So although my dad and I, we've always been really close, and he's always been really supportive of me and like whatever I like or whatever I do. That could be sitting and watching me play guitar in high school in my bedroom, or coming to a band concert when I was playing the trumpet, or trying himself to learn about the music I like, visiting me when I was in Ukraine during my Peace Corps service.
Oh, wow.
But I have this feeling now that my dad sees me as an adult, like a mutual. And though he has like so much more experience and knowledge than I do in regards to most things, I can't say how great it is uh, to to know the number of times this year that he's called me to ask for advice. So while always like appreciating my input and respecting me, and like having always telling other his coworkers or friends about what I'm doing in the classroom or elsewhere, but just that personal connection with this last year has felt really just so much different from the rest of my life. And and we can't meet up to have a beer or a coffee, which we did pretty frequently when he still lived in Northwest Indiana. So not having that opportunity right now is pretty hard. And then on top of that, I mean, being a new father while I'm still very much in survival mode and just basically adapting to my son's needs, the emotional big picture is still hanging in the back of my mind, thinking about the types of hard conversations I'll have to have with him in the future about the world, society, history, even our own family, and the impacts of some individuals on our family. Some people he'll never meet, but those rippling effects will still be there. And many of those many of those relationships and complexities, like I myself don't understand. So trying to convey that perhaps to someone younger just kind of feels like an impossible task.
Yeah, and I had a lot of thoughts about all of that on the next I've been meaning to tell you. So I'm like looking at these lyrics and like these tiny little chunks. I've been thinking about you. I've been meaning to tell you. And so this I've been meaning to tell you thing, my thought was like, this makes me think of all the things left unsaid to so many people across so many years. And I have talked about far more personal things with you on this podcast than I have with my own family. So while you and your dad are having these really great chats, I'm not. And being 100% real with family members is so hard because there's always such an expectation associated with being a member of a family. A person is born into a role in a family where essentially they can't often be who they want to be or fully express themselves. So you're either a son, daughter, niece, grandchild, nephew, grandma, dad, whatever. You are filtered almost through like a nickel and dime and quarter sorting machine into this like defined role where you are born into that role, often one of subservience if you're in a younger generation. And no matter how old you get, you're still the nephew, you're still the daughter, even if you're like 53, you know what I mean? So you could be 30 and still be filtered into a subservient family role, which creates these unspoken constraints over what can be said.
Right.
Harder to say hard things because you're in this role. You know, I think that feeling might start to change, but it has changed for me a bit. But man, like there are a lot of conversations I haven't had yet, and hopefully I'll get to. But this line hits me about the absurd passage of time as well. Like way back in our last Will and Testament episode, I talked about some moments in my life where folks died and I didn't really get to have any real substantive end of life conversations, and how it like haunts me like to this day. And this line, I've been meaning to tell you, reminds me and digs that knife a little deeper, that I never got to have a few of those moments that felt so important. But you know, sit down with me, let's have a drink. You know, this is a sentence I wish I would have said so many times to so many people. And thank you to Chris for writing such a human line. Let's just sit here with each other and just drink this beer. When I first heard this song, I thought this was cheesy, but damn it, if my, you know, like my impending or maybe officially middle-aged brain doesn't see the purpose behind this line far more than I did 3.5 years ago when this record came out. To me, this is a huge hook of a line for Propaganda as well. Among their hookiest material ever, you know, that this appears a few times in the song and bookends it at the beginning of the song and the end of the song, gives it a great line that will, you know, linger in the mind of the listener. Sit down with me, let's have a drink. It's the kind of line that just like pops into your head while you're driving, riding a bike, going on a walk, cooking dinner. And to me, two of Propaganda's hookiest songs are Imagineer and Call Before You Dig. You know, in recent days, I've been finding myself bursting into song at random moments, singing at Palmerston and Ruby Street. Yeah. Or sit down with me, let's have a drink. So I've been like thinking about these couple of songs, and I'll just like burst into song, singing Imagineer or Call Before You Dig. And interestingly, I found a review from Jade in Chicago that said Call Before You Dig might be the album's strongest song. So I know at least I'm not alone in how much that song has burrowed into my brain. But
it's so good.
I know. Dude, it's a crazy good song. It is so... At Palmerston and Ruby Street, the city I dug a ditch. I'm going to totally sing the 8-bit version of that one as well and see if I can get a good one. It's such a catchy song, but it's so earwormy, man. And sit down with me, let's have a drink. Earwormy too. So, you know, next, this lyric, I just want to take a second to give a shout out to all the friends that I haven't seen in a long time who I would love to sit down and have a drink with. Some I should have seen in a couple of years leading up to this pandemic, man. But I have so many regrets about what I failed to do in 2016, 2017, 2018, 2019, when the world was what it was. And some of my oldest friendships I totally took for granted as I navigated the early days of parenthood, and I am filled with regret. But in the past few months, I feel so lucky that a lot of friends and I have begun to reconnect. And just yesterday, I was Zooming with some of my closest friends ever who live in England. And life and distance got in the way of our friendship. And yesterday we were like, dude, you doing anything? Nope. Let's get on Zoom. Sweet. And we just, boom, there we were. All of us on Zoom together. And we gave each other 90 minutes of uninterrupted time to talk about kids, work, music, and it just felt so good. And we sat down and had that drink, you know? So Chris inviting the old man to sit down and have a drink is really beautiful, because I had one of those moments myself yesterday. So we should talk about the war stuff.
Yeah, the next line is, back when the war ended, your great grandfather hand wrote letters of apology to all of those families of the men who crewed that U-boat, haunted till his death by that long night off the coast. It's hard to read slowly.
Dude, it's so hard to sing. I botched that line every time. But Chris talked about this line on the Without Love episode on Patreon. He mentions the person in this line is his grandfather who wrote these letters spoken of here. So this is a line that seems to be like that homage to veterans of wars who are oftentimes just kids who were sent into situations they had no control over, led by people who really didn't care what their opinions on that situation were. And, oftentimes experienced horrendous mental and physical anguish, oftentimes fighting for causes they didn't really know the full extent of reasoning behind.
Right, Greg. And I think the evolution in how the band addresses things like war, and not just war, but the people who are involved in varying degrees and for varying purposes. I mean, the nuance, I think, that is introduced with songs like this make it far more effective, than Stick the Flag, right?
Yeah.
Right. Then G Wally. And I think personalizing it and showing that, I mean, obviously, as you said, maturity and the things that you grapple with as you get older, which you're not going to think about when you're in your early 20s and maybe more just blinded by anger and rage and what you see around you and the things that you can't change. So saying something abrasive and saying something like a blanket condemnation seems to be the right thing to do. But as we get older and we peel those layers and we realize that, I mean, everything is just far more complex than we want it to be.
Yeah, absolutely. And I got to thinking about the haunted till his death line. And I started digging into the VA website today and exploring information on PTSD. And a quote really struck me on the prevalence of PTSD in aging veterans. So in this song, Chris is talking about, grandfathers, like old men, right? And I found a quote from a guy named Louis Bickford, who was a veteran of the U.S. Navy from 1967 to 1978. And I found this quote right on the VA's website. And Bickford said, "The PTSD will hit you hardest when you retire or you're not occupied all the time." And that's so wild that the second you slow down in life and have time to reflect, ponder, or relax, it would come out of nowhere and really hit you. Just when you thought you were home free into retirement, you get blindsided by this onslaught of mental anguish and post-traumatic stress. So I picture these old guys in Chris's life who have seen some stuff that they didn't choose to see necessarily, but see them nonetheless they did. And those are demons that you carry with you forever. And I found some stats as well from combat operations. I found Operation Iraqi Freedom and Enduring Freedom, which were some catchy titles that the U.S. military put on those events. But around 11 to 20 out of every 100 veterans, so 11 to 20% of people who served in Operation Iraqi Freedom or Enduring Freedom have PTSD in any given year. Desert Storm, about 12 out of every 100 Gulf War veterans have PTSD in any given year. Vietnam, about 15 out of every 100 Vietnam veterans are currently diagnosed with PTSD at the time of the most recent study in the late 80s. And the National Vietnam Veterans Readjustment Study, and it is estimated that about 30 out of every 100 Vietnam veterans have PTSD in their lifetime. So those, the haunting till their death is a really powerful line here, because Chris isn't just singing about his family. There are so many people out there who, maybe were just seeking a leg up in life and, enlisted in the military, got sent in somewhere and saw some stuff and carry those things with them forever. But yeah, it's a powerful line about the haunting.
And I think even our conversation and our understanding that over time throughout history, but as a public, that's changed with PTSD. I mean, just go back to the Civil War, and that was called Soldier's Heart, right? And then World War I, it's referred to as shell shock.
Yeah, euphemism.
Right. So the changing of this over time and understanding that it wasn't, how many people were institutionalized following the Civil War because they didn't know how to treat and to help people who had been permanently damaged from the things that they had seen, experienced, or had done. And I highly recommend. StoryCorps has a series on YouTube that tells veterans stories, and they animate them. And I actually use this every year in my classroom for Veterans Day. It has a really, really interesting, wide-ranging experiences from Iraq to Vietnam and other conflicts that do exactly what the song does, right? It personalizes the experiences until we could understand from a human and individual level. One stands out of the number of, for example, veterans who commit suicide every day. I think it's like 20 every day. But there's a quote that said the parent of a soldier serving overseas said, he never really came home. And even that wording and understanding and how different people can be, or how they could be changed by their experiences, I think that makes it a little bit easier for people like you and me who didn't serve.
Yeah, absolutely. As far as the U-boat line, for anybody who doesn't know, a U-boat is an anglicized version of the German word U-Boot, a shortening of Unterseeboot, which literally means undersea boat. And while the German term refers to any submarine, really, the English one refers specifically to military submarines operated by Germany, particularly in the First and Second World War. So there's a little practical piece on that line. But the next line, it gets into your other great granddad came back from Arnhem, transformed into a damaged and violent man, never spoke of the slaughter he witnessed firsthand. And I think of the generational shifts in bottling up internal anger, sadness, frustration versus letting it out.
Right.
I wonder if today's battle exposed people are better at letting out their demons, or to what extent we're just perpetuating the trend of bottling up pain until we explode, essentially. Never spoke of the slaughter he witnessed firsthand. I think that that's a very common reaction. And unless we address that as a problem, that's a trend that would continue to happen, forcing people essentially to never be able to live truly happy or fulfilling lives again. I don't know. I'm not really sure. I'm not a psychologist, but so Arnhem, I know that you and Kyle talked about this, Battle of Arnhem, a battle of the Second World War, the vanguard of the Allied Operation Market Garden. And so, I thought that was really cool that it was a specific moment that Chris put in there, because he could have just said, came back from Holland, transformed into a damaged and violent man.
Right.
But he was far more specific, which is an invitation to us, the listeners, to go find out what the heck he's talking about,
Yeah. And I think Kyle's descriptions of best and worst case scenarios for Chris's grandfathers at war at sea and in the Netherlands, two drastically different iterations of war, killing and death during World War II, submarines and U-boats being a form of warfare where each side, as described, can dissociate themselves from their targets by simply pushing a button. But like Kyle mentioned regarding how Howard Zinn and bombers, but that alongside with essentially urban warfare in a series of Dutch towns. And I can't stop thinking about how the different experiences might have played a role in how each person processed, obviously maybe a generational thing, or a familial thing, and two very different people, but how what they saw and what they did in their time during the military, what that might have caused them to how to address those things following their service. And again, I'm being self-referential with propaganda lyrics, but the line "only kings emerge unscathed" from Name and Address really fits in here.
Yeah, and I love how the two lines in a row on this song are the first great granddad and then the second great granddad. So obviously these are Chris's granddads, which means that he's probably telling this to his son. So this is probably Chris telling your other great granddad came back from Arnhem. So that's him telling probably his oldest son, or maybe both of his sons, these stories of their great grandfathers being in World War II. And what's so nuts is that if there are two great granddads or granddads struggling with mental trauma, they won't talk about or seek to get medical help on to process. Think of all the ways that could reverberate across multiple generations of a single family. Think of the impact on spouses. Think of the kids that are born with that person as their father, and the years and years and years of raising your own kids while also dealing with these secrets that you're carrying with you. Think about, the irritability or the quick to anger or the frustrations that you could, essentially how that would impact parenting, and think of the grandkids that impacts who are raised by the children of those great granddads, so the ways normal people have been used as parts in the death and war machine is beyond troubling because of how many generations and how it's a spider web radiating outwards on how many people it can impact. But then Chris says, "Oh, this is the world I brought you into, man." So he's telling his son, like, "Oh yeah, I brought you into this world in death and destruction. You're welcome." But that line ties so directly to Zoochosis, where Chris is talking to his kids, and in Failed Imagineer, he's talking to the generation before him and his and his kids, and in Zoochosis, he's talking to the generation after him. And it's surreal to think of the multi-generational storyline being told on this record if you tie the thread of Chris's lyrics between Failed Imagineer and Adventures in Zoochosis.
Yeah, I can't tell you, Greg, how many times I struggled with the idea of bringing new life into this world.
Yep.
I mean, I've always wanted kids, and I've always planned and hoped to be a parent. But what that ultimately means is, like, militarized police violence worsens and informal wars rage on. Environmental destruction carries on pretty much unfettered. Climate change, food security. I mean, the doomsday clock is 100 seconds from midnight. And although it's a metaphor that represents the likelihood of a man-made global catastrophe, just think about how unprepared we were to deal with COVID. Mm-hmm. So what happens when a global emergency is worse? I mean, these are just incredibly sad lines here, and the frankness in addressing the hopelessness of human survival, or the ability to correct our what appears to be like species predilection toward violence. He's spending more time reflecting, worrying, regretting than maybe railing against the system, saying he's no longer what he used to be, but also admitting that what he used to be wasn't what he thought he was, a shell of a shell.
Yeah, that line is nuts. Like, so many of us walk through the world each day already sort of broken, sort of damaged, sort of hating ourselves, wishing we were somewhere else, fantasizing about lives we aren't living, the lives that we can't live. And we're sort of shell-like throughout years of sadness anyway in a lot of ways, but then something actually traumatic happens, and then suddenly our former shell seems like a freaking paradise. Like,
Yeah, right.
think of how unhappy some of us were pre-COVID, and then force us into our houses for a year where going out in public brings possible death, sickness, pain. And then our former sort of depressed selves seems almost like a dreamscape, you know, like going to shows whenever I want, even if I'm in a bad mood, like, oh, hey, I'm going to watch the Cro-Mags tonight. You know what I mean? Like, I can't even imagine being sent off to war in the state that I'm currently in. Like, imagine if a war breaks out right now and all these people that are like damaged due to this pandemic are like, well, now we're going to go fight a war. I would become instantly paralyzed if somebody tried to send me to war right now. And the idea of not being able to use your poor experiences to advocate for like the abolition of terrible experiences for future generations because you are too caught up in reliving your own personal tragedy. It's like a bummer. Like, it made me tremendously sad to think about the mental agony of being so distraught that it rendered me unable to talk about PTSD or war damage. Like, imagine if, like, you know, the characters in this song or anybody comes back from a war and they're like, all right, that was horrible. So I'm going to spend the rest of my life as an anti-war activist, and I'm going to try to make it so that fewer people walk away with the damage that I walked away with. But like, when you're so traumatized, the thought of like engaging in a lifetime of advocacy to abolish the thing that damaged you, that's a big ask, you know? So shell of my former shell is intense.
So then that goes into the dreaded. So what have we here? The dreaded failed Imagineer, his private dismay on public display. Son, do not be alarmed by your old man's tears. So the Imagineer, I assume, is a reference to Disney.
Yeah.
And I pulled this quote, this description from the Disney Imagineering website. It says, founded by Walt Disney in 1952, Walt Disney Imagineering is the creative force behind the memorable Disney experiences that connect and inspire across generations and borders. And we are proud our experiences continue to set the bar in an industry Walt's Imagineers pioneered. Walt Disney Imagineering embodies a world-class design firm, premier development company, extraordinary storytelling studio, and cutting-edge innovation lab, all rolled into one. Home to an overwhelming breadth of expert talent from around the globe, Imagineers partner closely with the colleagues from across the Walt Disney Company to bring the most awe-inspiring new worlds and cherished characters to life. So, Greg, I don't keep up with Disney too much. You know, I've been to Orlando, Florida with family or friends probably about a dozen times, though I haven't been there in probably about, I say, 14 years. And I have no intention on going anytime soon, but I do appreciate the creativity put into the design, the detail, and essentially world building, but in theme park form. And if anyone hasn't seen it, I really strongly recommend the documentary series, The Imagineering Story. I watched it with my in-laws in 2019. And while it's definitely a fluff piece, again, you have to admire the creativity of the Imagineers. I mean, it pulls back the curtain on how Disney is able to create incredibly convincing worlds within their theme parks. The efforts put into creating, for example, like a canyon, what looks like a realistic natural canyon in the middle of a park, or trackless rides so it feels like you're actually immersed in that world, or the manipulation of space and color and shape, all to make those fictional settings feel real. I mean, even the trash cans are emptied via vacuum to prevent people from ever having to see the mundane task of watching someone remove a trash bag. So I think at first I interpreted this as perhaps one of Chris's grandfathers applying for a job at Disney following the war and not getting it. But I read an interpretation online that I think just fits so much better, that Chris is the failed Imagineer, that he attempted to create a better world for his children, and not just through activism and political engagement and through the band, but his world building um, within his inner circle, within his home. Like from it social media post, I've seen references to everything from Dungeons and Dragons, obviously hockey, time outside exploring, music, science, and of course, Disney. Positive hobbies and interests that shut out the darkness of reality, the horror just outside our doors. And just like Disney offers a fabricated escape, an illusion of happiness, like where theme parks, where people want to forget the looming threats or the difficulties of daily life, the uncertainties of the future, or the pain of the past, like in this song, Disney is still manufactured escape where popular culture pretends to be culture in a way. And there's a part in that documentary that addresses the failure of Disney Paris, I think it was called, because French people pretty much saw right through it. And one French writer said the park was, quote, a horror made of cardboard, plastic, and appalling colors, a construction of hardened chewing gum, and idiotic folklore taken straight out of comic books written for obese Americans. And my point is, I guess, that we all have our escapes and we try to create little worlds that we hope are perfect or at least better. And we hope to make something better than what's outside our doors. So for me, I guess I have to say I have to give it to Disney for doing it so well. And, I saw one listener online said, alternatively, maybe Western society is the failed Imagineer, projecting an image of perfection and harmony when underneath there is violence and fear.
Well, and we're kind of Imagineers here making this podcast, aren't we? It's like a little project that we do together to feel like we're creative and keep our brains going. And another thought that I thought of was like, what if people who go off and join the military and go off to fight for causes that they believe in are another version of Imagineering. They think they're going to create like a better world by fighting for this cause. And then they come back and instead of the better world, they have personal anguish instead.
Right.
So, but and we're all kind of Imagineers. You graduate high school chasing a dream of graduating high school. You graduate college chasing the dream of graduating college and landing the job. You land the job chasing a dream. What's next? You chase the spouse. You chase the kids and buying a house. But then suddenly middle-aged drudgery sets in and you're in your like mid 30s, late 30s, early 40s, mid 40s. Your metabolism slows down, your joint pain ramps up, the kids are everywhere, work is one project after another, and the chasing, the Imagineering, and the hunger to chase fades away in a lot of instances, and that's when a lot of rot sets in. You know what I mean? Oh boy. So, then we have
speaking my language.
I'm sorry. I feel it, man. I've had 2 surgeries in my early 30s. It sucked. So here we have, hey, old man, it's okay. Every dog has its day. Sit down with me. Let's have a drink. And the notion of comforting each other is something that really brings me a lot of joy and pain on this line. The thought of comforting these long-suffering old men who had experiences that wrought generational pain is very moving. It's very human to picture comforting an elderly man who has carried with him unaddressed PTSD for many years, and just allowing that old man to just maybe have a cry. And it just shows how deep down all of us are scared. We move through each day just a single inch from having our vulnerabilities exposed, our uncertainty exposed, our doubts and fears exposed. And in this moment, like this visual of this guy in his mid 40s who was once the kid and is now a dad himself sliding into the role of comforter is a moving visual. And other pictures this brings to mind are the images of my grandfather in the hospital the last time I saw him several years back, and how his final days were not easy. You know, those darting eyes that I talked about in Last Will and Testament, and knowing this was the end, man, it hurts. So that's kind of what I got thinking on the way out on this song, is a couple of missed opportunities.
Yeah, and I actually hear that last part is also being in the future, Chris's son saying that to him, not just Chris saying that to, you know, his grandfather.
Ooh, I like that.
But also consoling him who might feel regret and who might feel like, you know, he hasn't done what he had hoped to do for his children. So I kind of hear this as Chris coming clean with some things, like what he aimed to do as a parent, or addressing his family history, his personal choices, and his attempts to create a better world for his kids. And even if that was only at home, but maybe he's failed. And like Kyle said, he hears the song not so much about change, but the fact that things are the same. Like the world is still violent. It's just that the violence itself has evolved. And I pick up a theme from Cormac McCarthy's writing, an idea that the world is violent. It's always been violent. And there's this illusion of like, I don't understand the world anymore. But for example, like No Country for Old Men, Uncle Mac being shot on his front porch, you know, like while other people are trying to claim that the country, you know, like things are getting worse. There's a line that says, you know, what you got ain't nothing new. This country's hard on people. Can't stop what's coming. Or in The Road, it doesn't really matter what caused the global catastrophe. If it was a meteor, a super volcano, or warfare, all of those things have happened before, and they're all pretty much guaranteed to happen again on a long enough timeline.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, did you find any good YouTube comments that you would like to share to bring us in for a close tonight?
Yeah, I have quite a few actually. There's so many comments.
I've got a few too.
Again, I get a million plus views. I guess that makes sense. So one said, heard this one 100 times, and for some reason today it made me cry.
I found one that said, somehow this video was my first exposure to this group as a hobbyist of punk rock and a combat veteran. This was the most moved I've been by music in the last decade. My sincerest appreciation.
Wow. Yeah. Another says, no band has been as consistently skilled at such level as Propagandy. Their lyrics still bite with the anger of a 17-year-old high schooler, but with the wisdom of making music for decades through some fucking awful world events.
Another one that I found says, Bass Dude, aka Todd, just rearranged some of my molecules with that serenade.
All right, I got one more, Greg. It says, I love this song so much. My granddad turned into an angry alcoholic after World War II. He couldn't talk about it, and he used booze to escape. His anger had a huge effect on my grandma, mom, and uncle. If there's an afterlife, I hope he's found some rest and relief.
Wonderful. Well, so I have a sort of takeaway lesson here. I can't stop thinking about all of my missed opportunities and all the conversations that I never had. And why am I so good at having conversations with people that I've never met for real? Like, we have so many conversations on this show, you know?
Right.
And I just go so deep with people. But I'm so terrible at having the same kinds of conversations with people who have known me my entire life. And that's a weird personality characteristic to realize about yourself. But, conversations with family at a surface level is pretty painful to think about when I've had hundreds of conversations on tape that are deeper than nearly all the conversations I've had with my family. And it's a pretty broken feeling when I think about how I'm actually good at talking to people, but how I'm missing out on some seriously important ones. So that's what this song's got me thinking about right now.
Yeah, Greg, Failed Imagineer, I think, looks backward just as much as it looks forward. And though I learned just a ton chatting with Kyle about World War II, my takeaway is definitely on the future part. So if my home, my apartment is Magic Kingdom or Epcot, what sort of world do I plan on building for my son? And so much of what actually matters feels like it's just out of my control. Like the things that I wish I could change and push a lever and pull, some string and magically fix something. I can't. And if a person who's been way more informed and involved thinks that things are kind of hopeless, it's hard for me to have hope that anything's going to improve as well. So what positive things will I promote within my family? What will I model? I'm not in charge of the real world, but I have an active role in shaping and improving the lives of my wife, of my son. So even if it's just an illusion, even in reality, it is hard to have hope knowing that I'm not going to be the one who imagineers a better world for everyone. That's pretty clear. At least maybe I can think that my son will have a role, and his generation will have a role in making things better for everybody.
Would you like to do the honors of rating this song first?
Yeah, Greg, Failed Imagineer has some incredible lyrics that hurt now that I think about them, 2 months into being a parent. And it has a really unique blend of sounds from the band's history. But I still can't help but wonder if the tone of the musical tone and the message of the lyrics, that older punk rock feel, was intentional, as that quote I read at the beginning, as it contrasts with the dark historical, personal, and familial themes. And I wonder what Chris's thoughts on that are. If it is like today's empires to try to trick people into headbanging along and then thinking about something different. But part of me does wish it did sound more like something off Failed States if it were a little denser and a little heavier, because the lyrics are so dense and heavy. And for me, I feel like a part of the message or the severity of the track is lost in the way, but I still never skip it. I sing along to it the best I can when it comes up, since we've already established it's pretty much impossible to. But I would say that it's probably one of the 2 or 3 tracks since Potemkin has come out that I have somewhat mixed feelings on. So I do like a lot about it, but I'm going to give it a 3 overall.
Oh, cool. Nice. So something that I just thought of, something brand new. Earlier, I listed all the songs where Chris sings about his family, and I didn't say Lotus Gate. We never spoke of it again.
Yeah.
Oh God, what a missed opportunity. I hope people who are listening to this point are appreciative of the fact that I had a last minute revelation and opinion there. So I'm going to give this one a 4.
Mm-hmm.
I really like the earworminess of it. Like there are, propaganda songs. This is a catchy one to me. I find myself bursting into song regularly. I noticed that Propaganda opens with this one a bunch at a lot of their sets over the last 3 years, which is pretty cool to me. It's just got a lot of what I like. And to be perfectly frank, one of the main reasons I'm giving it a 4 instead of a 3 is because of Todd's bass. So I think that is such a special moment on the bass for Todd's playing across his years in the band. So he elevated this one for me with his spectacular bass riffage. So my Bassmaster 4 goes to Todd tonight. So that is our episode on Failed Imagineer from Victory Lap. Thank you super, super hugely to Randy Frykas, documentarian extraordinaire and Caress of Steel hockey shredder, and to Kyle Bailey, our military historian friend of the podcast, who came on and dropped some serious wisdom on us. And just to give everybody a heads up, soon Keith and I are going to take a little break, a little breather, where we're going to take a week off or so, just to kind of gather our bearings after going at this for more than 6 straight months, and we'll be hitting 40 episodes soon. And so after our next episode, we're going to take a tiny little breather just to kind of gather our bearings and think about stuff for a bit. But then we'll be back. So if you want to hit us up, you can find us on email at propagandipod@gmail.com. You can find us on Instagram and Twitter at propagandipod. And, you know, I got a shout out. I noticed that there is a song by song No Means No podcast coming out, which I've been personally enjoying. So on our week off, maybe you can go and check out that new No Means No podcast. It's called No Means Nothing, and you can find that everywhere you get podcasts. And I listened to the first few episodes, and it's super sweet. So that's our episode on Failed Imagineer, and we will see you next week.
Sit down with me, let's have